Chapter 310. The group quickly walked towards the snowy plains. The closer they got, the more violent the wind and thunder became. It was as if 10,000 horses were galloping, causing a piercing pain in their eardrums. Blue Bird held the kana in one hand and the umbrella in the other. Her expression was the same as usual. The old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat probably felt that this matter had nothing to do with him, so he walked rather lazily and leisurely, allowing the rain to fall on his body. With the old god of swords' vigorous internal energy, it wasn't difficult for him to keep the wind and rain away from him. However, for Li Chungang, this kind of gaudy expert demeanor wasn't something that could be faked. One umbrella couldn't block the wind and rain. The hem of Su Fengyin's brocade gown had long been soaked, and his boots were almost enough to raise a few small fish. He raised his hand into the rain and pushed the umbrella towards Blue Bird. However, he hadn't taken more than a few steps when Blue Bird quietly moved back. Half of her body was exposed to the rain. Su Fengyin was so angry that he laughed and took the umbrella. He hugged Blue Bird's slender shoulders and held the umbrella together. Xinyuan Qingfeng had been in a daze the entire way, swaying and falling. Her cultivation in martial arts had always been mediocre. The rain of soybeans slapped on her cold and elegant face, making her look extremely pitiful. Su Fengyin turned around and glanced at her. He didn't pity her at all. To be honest, he didn't have any irreconcilable enmity with this woman. It was just that he had bumped into a knife's edge when he was traveling back in the day and had a small grudge with her. In addition, the Xinyuan family was a big tree that attracted the wind. His Royal Highness couldn't get along with others, so he naturally wouldn't bicker with ordinary people. After a few rounds, he had picked Xinyuan Qingfeng and Hui Shan. Moreover, every time when Hua mentioned this daughter of a wealthy family, he would always gnash his teeth. As brothers forged in times of trouble, Su Fengyin had to vent his anger no matter what. He remembered that when Su Fengyin was playing wild chess to earn money, when Hua would pretend to be a chess player to win some copper coins, so as to lure the spectators into the trap. When Su Fengyin quarreled with others, he would say that a gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists. He would appear to be trying to mediate the fight, but he would shout with all his might to stop the fight, but in reality he would kick those bastards who lost in chess but refused to pay up. Usually, after a fight, the other party would inexplicably suffer countless monkey-plucking peaches or black tiger digging out the heart. Their entire body would be covered with Wenhua's footprints. When they finally came back to their senses, they were already lying on the ground without the strength to fight back. As for Wenhua, he admired Su Fengyin from the bottom of his heart. He remembered that once at the Lantern Festival in Lu Province, the two fellows saw a young lady in front of them. Her waist was really thin, so thin that it made people worry that her waist would be broken if they twisted it. Su Fengyin made a bet with Wenhua that he could hug Gu Liang's small waist without being hit. How could Wenhua be willing to believe it? As a result, Su Fengyin indeed openly put his hand on that young lady's small waist and even intimately whispered something into her ear. After that, Wenhua's eyeballs almost fell to the ground. That young lady first glared angrily at Su Fengyin, but after hearing what he said, her eyes instantly became as gentle as water. She only glared fiercely at Wenhua, but she did not struggle free. Su Fengyin immediately let go of that seductive small waist and chatted and laughed with the young lady. His hand, however, made a kneading gesture on her small perky buttocks for Wenhua to see. Until now, Wenhua still did not know how Su Fengyin did it. In fact, it was very simple. Su Fengyin told that young lady that Wenhua behind her was a perverted thief with bad intentions. He was protecting the flower. The pitiful Wenhua had looked at every woman in the past with eyes full of lust. Let alone a perverted thief, even if he was a great perverted thief who mercilessly destroyed a flower, the young lady still believed him without a doubt. Su Fengyin hugged Bluebird's damp shoulders tightly and said with a soft laugh, "You called me young master when a few times. Wenhua will really remember you for many years." Bluebird gave a puzzled grunt. Su Fengyin turned his head and stared at her face that could be considered delicate, but he never got tired of looking at it. He smiled and said, "It's nothing. My mind accidentally went astray." Xinyuan Jingyi walked at the very front, the little abacus in his stomach crackling loudly and loudly. After his eldest brother had caused the death of Xinyuan Jingxin, who was at the Grandmaster realm, he still dared to come to Bull's Descent Snow Plateau. Even if he brought a bramble to ask for punishment, he still wouldn't be able to get anything out of it. The old ancestor's temperament was hard to predict, but there was no doubt that he liked to seek revenge for the smallest grievance and to weigh the benefits extremely well. His eldest brother, Xinyuan Jingqing, had obviously studied to the point that he had become a cripple. It was one thing for him to be content with his useless studies, But how could the old ancestor easily forgive him for using some unknown method to kill his third brother, whom he had placed such high hopes on? That niece of his who was fiercely siding with outsiders was acting abnormally. There was a suspicion that a broken jar would be smashed. In Mount Hui, how could a woman have the slightest chance to stand out? Grand Guest Elder Huang Fengfu's expression was calm, but Hong Piao, on the other hand, seemed to be distressed. Xianyuan Jingyi didn't pay attention to these minor details. Stepping onto the snow plateau, Xianyuan Jingyi immediately caught sight of the old ancestor's imposing figure. His qi leaked out violently like a tide, as if he was holding up a large umbrella, repelling the raindrops from 3 feet away from him. He then looked at his eldest brother, Xianyuan Jingqing, who was standing in the field like a drowned rat, covering his mouth and coughing. You Confucian scholars scrupulously abide by the words of the northern sage Zhang, who said that you should cultivate your body, govern the country, and bring peace to the world. But let me ask you, Xianyuan Jingqing, what kind of body do you cultivate, what kind of family do you govern? After living your whole life, you can't even protect your wife and daughter. Other people reincarnate to be free and unfettered. Haha, it's fine if you don't reincarnate. The wind whistled at the top of the mountain, but old ancestor Xuanyuan's arrogant laughter was even more ear-piercing. According to common sense, Xianyuan Jingqing was far from 50 years old. It was appropriate to say that he had lived half his life, but Xianyuan Great Plate said that he had lived his whole life. It was obvious that he had seen through Xianyuan Jingqing's method of fighting for the realm at the cost of his life. Moreover, the old ancestor didn't intend to let this scholarly and crafty junior continue to live. It was enough for Mount Hui to have one land immortal. What was the point of enjoying the land immortal alone? If there were two, what kind of scandal would it be? How could he enjoy the land immortal alone? If Xianyuan Jingqing was willing to practice martial arts according to his wishes, Xianyuan Great Plate wouldn't mind letting him take over Mount Hui after he ascended. But if Xianyuan Jingqing could compete for the land immortal in his lifetime, Xianyuan Great Plate would definitely strangle him. It would be best if I could ascend. If I worked hard for 100 years to seek immortality without any results after I died, who would care about the rise and fall of the family? My children and grandchildren would have their own fortune. Whether it was glory or disgrace, Xianyuan Great Plate wouldn't care about this damn thing. When Xianyuan Jingqing heard this, he finally ate a pill of reassurance. There was no deviation in the development of the situation. This time the old ancestor wouldn't tolerate his big brother's misdeeds. He was curious about how his big brother could kill Xianyuan Jingxian, who had already entered the Finger Profound realm. Xianyuan Jingqing believed that he had the right time, place, and people to sit in charge of Mount Hui, but he still couldn't do it. Xianyuan Jingqing inadvertently saw his father's expression and was shocked. Why was his father so serious? Then Xianyuan Jingqing said something that made Xianyuan Jingqing sluggish. Heaven's evil can be forgiven, but the evil you bring upon yourself is the hardest to bear. Today, Xianyuan Jingqing was only enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens and sweeping away the 500 years of accumulated dust of Mount Hui. As for how much can be swept away, that would depend on the will of the heavens. In half a cup of tea's time, you exchanged 216 moves with the old ancestor as a heavenly image cultivator. Does the old ancestor have any chance of winning? Why use words to boost your courage? Xianyuan Great Plate, who had already accumulated power in Mount Hui for 60 years, was very calm. He said tit for tat, "You did your best without regard for your life, but did you ever hurt me?" Xianyuan Jingqing, who was dressed as a middle-aged scholar, smiled faintly. The old ancestor walked on the martial path for nearly 100 years. To Mount Hui, even if there was no merit, there was still hard work. If Xianyuan Jingqing won easily after 20 years of observation, the old ancestor would die unwillingly. Xianyuan Jingqing only felt that this big brother of his had lost his mind. But very quickly Xianyuan Jingqing felt a monstrous chill fill his bones. Exchanged 200 moves with the old ancestor? Xianyuan Jingqing suddenly turned his head and said, "Third brother respected Xianyuan Jingqing because of charm, second brother respected you because of slyness. Both are not righteous. The sins of the heavens can be forgiven, but the sins of one's own making are the hardest to bear." Xianyuan Great Plate said with a ferocious expression, "I want to see what other tricks you can play." Xianyuan Jingqing said calmly, "Jingqing has been observing for 20 years. I hope that today will be the day when I have accumulated enough. I definitely won't disappoint the old ancestor. Since everyone is here, Jingqing will go first. If the old ancestor still wants to hide and suppress your cultivation at medium heavenly image, be careful that you won't have the chance to reach great heavenly image." Xianyuan Great Plate sneered, "Oh? You caused such a big commotion, and even that woman with broken shoes didn't come to watch. You can't wait to go to the Yellow Springs Road? Could it be that you can't hold on until then? Your method is mysterious, but it's much more unorthodox than mine. Without waiting for the old ancestor to finish speaking, Xianyuan Jingqing rudely stopped listening. Instead, he turned his head and looked at his daughter from afar. This scholar had an open-minded smile on his face. Cultivating one's body was the correct heart. Scholar Mo Dao didn't have the courage to ask the heavens and earth to sink into the sea. Successful people didn't only have extraordinary talents, they also had to have a tenacious will. Xianyuan Qingfeng's mind flashed by, and those poems and essays appeared one by one. I've become a land immortal. Xianyuan Jingqing closed his eyes. He was bleeding from his 7 orifices, but his expression was calm as he spread out his hands. It was as if he wanted to encompass the entire world. With him as the center, the accumulated water on the snowy plains exploded outwards. In that instant, 9 bolts of lightning came from the heavenly court. Li Chungang, who had been silent all this time, sighed, "How is this kid a Confucian scholar? He's clearly a Confucian saint." Chapter 311. The heavenly thunder was as thick as a tree. In the blink of an eye, it was projected onto the great snow plateau, exploding 9 large holes. Fortunately, the spectators were all safe and sound. The great snow plateau was divided into 2 parts by the Confucian scholar Xianyuan Jingqing. The 9 purple serpent-like thunder and lightning struck the great ancestor Xuanyuan's side. The old man was so arrogant that he didn't even try to dodge. His fist, which was as big as a bowl, smashed towards one of the purple thunder pillars. Upon contact, the earth trembled and the mountains shook. The great ancestor Huishan stood firm, but one of his sleeves was burned to ashes. The remaining purple thunder and lightning flickered, making him look like a divine general of thunder. Xianyuan Guiqi's strength was outstanding and his realm was profound. He had already understood the mandate of heaven, but after seeing this scene, his heart was still in turmoil. In Mount Hui, only he was qualified to say a few words to the cold-hearted Great Snow Plateau. However, he was still far from being on equal footing. Even if Xianyuan Guiqi was a great grandmaster of swordsmanship, he still had to be submissive and respectful in front of the Great Snow Plateau. Before the destruction of the Forbidden Villa, Huishan Xianyuan was known as the North Gishu and the South Xianyuan. His martial arts foundation was very long, and he learned a lot from many people. Other than a few exquisite and unique mental cultivation methods, the elders mostly taught the younger generation according to their aptitude. Xianyuan Guiqi was known as having an innate sword embryo since he was young, so he started to practice swordsmanship early. Now, there were 3 people in the current generation with the surname Jing. According to the custom, when they were 1 year old, they had to grab a book. The 3 people were different. Xianyuan Jingqing grabbed a book called The Spring and Autumn Annals, while Xianyuan Jingxian and Xianyuan Jingxian grabbed 2 martial arts secret manuals. In the next generation, because there were many children, it became more and more complicated. Xianyuan Qingfeng grabbed a jade rui, while Xianyuan Jinggong's eldest son, Xianyuan Qingmeng, picked a string of bells. There were all kinds of strange things. Su Fengnian was about to ask when the old god of swords tilted his head and scratched his ear. It seemed that he did not feel any sense of accomplishment because he could not dig out the earwax. He said in a bad mood, "Open your eyes and watch carefully. The next 2 people are competing with something that can't be bought with money. Their moves may be ordinary, but after returning to the basics, it is nothing more than simplification. However, the flow of qi and timing are the key. For swordsmen like us, in the end, the sword is nothing more than a horizontal, vertical, and diagonal slash. Why is it that ordinary people use swords so inflexible, but brilliant swordsmen can generate upstanding qi? Sword immortals can fly and cut off heads? Once the sword is thrust, unless it is done with all its might and is as fast as it can be. Otherwise, once the qi circulates, although it seems fast, it will suddenly slow down, causing the opponent's expected counterattack to miss. When he changes, he will suddenly increase his speed. If he changes again, even if he can make it in time, he will lose his initial momentum. This is the most common and simple principle. When experts exchange blows, fighting strength is the foundation. Among them, a battle of wits, courage, and ruthlessness is the most exciting part. I remember that when the #1 expert of the Beimang went to the 2 Zen temples, he was stopped by the white-robed monk. The 2 of them did not seem to have truly exchanged blows. They did not make a single move and just stood there motionless. One of them was a martial sage, and the other could have been the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of Buddhism. They could not be dozing off in a daze, right? But why didn't the son of the Beimang, who had reached the pinnacle of martial arts, make a move? This is the true beauty of the Vajra realm. The so-called first-grade Vajra realm experts of today's world are far inferior. Isn't the dead Xianyuan Jingxian known as the Vajra Invincible Finger? Invincible Vajra my ass. Xianyuan Jingqing abruptly used his chi to forcefully soar into the sky. After the 9 thunderbolts, there were bursts of heavenly thunder. In an instant, a strange phenomenon appeared. The water met the purple thunder. Li Chungang narrowed his eyes and said, "Little Su, if you don't want your retainers to be implicated and end up dying an unnatural death, then hurry up and get them to retreat. This old man only promised to protect your life. As for the others, the heavenly thunder is rolling down in a chaotic manner. This old man does not have the patience to block the natural disaster for them." Su Fengyin waved his hand, indicating that everyone except for Huang Manor and Bluebird should retreat from the Great Snow Plateau. Xianyuan Jingqing and the 2 esteemed guests were shaken. Even though they were used to big scenes at this moment, their faces were extremely pale. Especially Xianyuan Jingqing, who felt guilty in his heart. He was simply overwhelmed. Big Brother's words of "I will become an earthly immortal" were more than 1,000 words of warning and threat. Earthly immortal realm? In the 100 years of the pugilistic world, other than Qi Xuanzhen of Mount Longhu, who was publicly recognized as a heavenly talent in his youth, even Wang Xinji, who occupied the 2nd place in the world for 60 years in Martial Emperor City, only dared to guess if she had such a divine ability. Could be seen how rare this earthly immortal realm was. The most mysterious thing was that this earthly immortal realm was far from what other first stage 3 realms could guess. In the past 500 years, there were some heaven-defying geniuses who had once reached the peak. However, they usually could not last long. It was like a swan stepping on snow and mud. They would occasionally leave a claw on the mud and quickly return to heavenly phenomenon. There were very few who directly ascended like Qi Xuanzhen. This was also why Qi Xuanzhen was regarded as the only immortal who could rival Ancestor Lu in the past 500 years. On the plateau, Xianyuan Jingqing once again surprised everyone. He gave up what was close at hand and went for what was far away. He fought with old ancestor Xianyuan in close combat. Xianyuan Jingqing and Xianyuan Pan rushed forward together. The latter's figure was in a straight line, and the wind and rain were swept away. He leaped up and hit Xianyuan Jingqing with his knee. Xianyuan Jingqing pressed his hands on old ancestor's knee and slid back, causing countless splashes. This Confucian scholar who had already transcended mortality did not want to dissipate this tyrannical force. Instead he pushed to the side. Xianyuan Pan's burly body was still in the air. Xianyuan Jingqing leaned forward and smashed down with his elbow, smashing old ancestor's body onto the plateau. This was not enough. He kicked out and sent Xianyuan Pan flying more than 100 feet away. Xianyuan Jingqing took advantage of the situation and chased after him. Xianyuan Pan was kicked away. His 5 fingers dug into the ground and suppressed the momentum of his defeat. He clapped his palms and finally got up. When Xianyuan Jingqing closed in, he punched out with both fists. Xianyuan Jingqing, with an indifferent expression, met his opponent's fists with both hands and held them firmly. His figure stood tall and did not fall. A large space behind him had already been compressed by the enormous qi dynamic, causing the wind and rain to evaporate in an instant. Xianyuan Jingqing raised his hand and said softly, "Send old ancestor to heaven." Xianyuan Pan's body soared into the sky. Heavenly lightning struck down from the sky. A loud boom. Xianyuan Jingqing, who was standing on the ground, did not show any mercy after gaining the upper hand. He clapped his palms together in front of him. The accumulated water at the edge of the plateau that was originally flowing down the mountain surged up like 2 green dragons. The 2 dragons pierced through the sky of the plateau. Xianyuan Pan, who was in the air in a hurry to operate his sea of qi to resist the heavenly lightning, was blasted until he no longer had the strength to move. Xianyuan Jingqing tapped his toes and his figure soared into the air. He grabbed old ancestor Xuanyuan's belt and landed on the ground. He ran quickly. After running for 200 feet, his legs suddenly stopped. He threw Xianyuan Pan straight to the west, as if he wanted to throw this old ancestor Huishan off the plateau. Send him to heaven in one go? When Xianyuan Pan's body was about to fly out of the cliff of the plateau, he unexpectedly fell and landed on the edge of the cliff. Finally, the rainwater could not wash away the bloodstains on his face. He no longer had the calm and composed demeanor of a great master. Chapter 312. The old man was enduring, waiting for the eldest grandson of the first wife to exhaust his life to enter the realm of immortals from the side door. Xianyuan de Pan's celestial state was achieved step by step. As long as his meridians were not depleted, his sea of qi would not be exhausted. However, Xianyuan Jingqing, who was determined to destroy his sect, was different. Taking a shortcut was like building a pavilion in the sky. No matter how majestic it looked when it was built, there would be a moment when it would collapse. Xianyuan Pan took a deep breath. His chest and abdomen were burning with pain. It had been many years since he had encountered such a terrifying injury to his heart. It had been so long that he had almost forgotten about this pain. The last time was when he competed with Qi Xuanzhen on the demon-slaying platform. As for Gu Jiantang and the others, their so-called loss was only in a move or two. Since they did not fight to the death, Xianyuan Pan's loss was not considered tragic. Xianyuan Pan was about to take the time to adjust his breath when Xianyuan Jingqing leisurely appeared in front of him. He heard the grandson of the Confucian sage say softly, "Although it is difficult to climb, it can reach Kunlun. Falling from evil is useless in Kunlun. Old ancestor, you should read those books that you think are useless. Martial arts can be cultivated from secret manuals. To reach the celestial state, it is not something that can be accumulated from hundreds or thousands of martial arts secret manuals." Xianyuan Pan said ferociously, "You think you are worthy to talk to me about principles?" Blood no longer seeped out of Xianyuan Jingcheng's 7 orifices. Instead it flowed out. It was no longer scarlet but a shocking black. However, this Confucian scholar's expression was still calm. Xianyuan Pan swept out with his foot, and he stepped on Ancestor Huishan's knee, causing him to fall to the ground pathetically, crashing into the rain. Xianyuan Jingqing smiled and said, "Xianyuan Jingqing is talking to you. Old ancestor, you can naturally ignore it. But now that an immortal is talking to you, why are you still so arrogant and ignorant?" A thick bolt of lightning struck where Xianyuan Pan landed. Fortunately, the latter sensed it and rolled without caring about his identity, barely escaping the disaster. Xianyuan Jingqing was dumbfounded and his lips trembled. The ancient sword at Xianyuan Guiqi's waist did not dare to make any sound, fearing that it would cause an unpredictable disaster. Pull one hair and the whole body will be affected. Heaven's secret. The more powerful a person was, the more they could manipulate heaven and earth. Xianyuan Guiqi was well aware that on the snowfield of Mount Hui, he was the one who was most likely to be affected by the aftermath of the catastrophe. Xianyuan Jingqing coughed a few times. It was supposed to be very light, but it sounded exceptionally sharp in the ears of the experts present. Xianyuan Dandan was overjoyed. His figure flashed straight away, no longer wanting to fight to the death. He only wanted to increase the distance between him and Xianyuan Jingqing, the farther the better. How could something like face compare to the most important thing, life? Xianyuan Jingqing did not chase after him. He looked at the entrance of the great snow field and did not see that familiar figure. His eyes dimmed slightly. He covered his mouth and turned to look at Xianyuan Ancestor. He asked indifferently, "Do you have any last words for the descendants of Mount Hui?" Xianyuan Pan pretended to be deep in thought to stall for time. To be honest, Su Fengyan admired Xianyuan Dandan's shamelessness. As the high and mighty ancestor of Mount Hui, he was also one of the top few figures in the entire Jianghu. However, he kidnapped people for dual cultivation and took people's wives and daughters. When he was at a disadvantage, he did not care about his status at all. Needless to say, his martial arts skills were even more impressive. Just as His Royal Highness's imagination was running wild, the middle-aged scholar called Confucian Sage by the old god of swords suddenly looked over. Su Fengyan's body suddenly froze. However, for some reason the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat ignored him. Instead, he just stared blankly at the demon-slaying platform on Mount Longhu, leaving behind a not-so-tall figure. Xianyuan Jingqing looked at His Royal Highness. He coughed and said intermittently, "After dealing with the family matters, Xianyuan Jingqing will talk to Qing Feng about his martial arts experience. In the future, she will pass it on to you as a reward for His Royal Highness taking the risk to come up the mountain today. It's a pity that I won't have the chance to invite your highness to drink a pot of osmanthus wine. Qingfeng's method of warming wine is excellent." Xianyuan Jingqing looked at Su Longxiang again. There was admiration in his eyes. What a good saying. Li Bai won't be lonely anymore from the 2 Zen temples. Here Xianyuan Jingqing will say one more thing. Little prince, you shouldn't enter the celestial phenomenon state so easily. After entering the celestial phenomenon state, you will be invincible. You have to know that once you enter the celestial phenomenon state, you will have to resonate with heaven and earth. An ordinary man with a jade ring will only be attacked by thieves. Su Fengyan said respectfully, "Su Fengyan thanks Mr. for the guidance." Xianyuan Jingqing nodded and then said to Xianyuan Guiqi. However, he didn't turn his head to look at him. He said indifferently and calmly, "Father, please leave the mountain. You can never enter the mountain again in this life. Xianyuan Guiqi was so angry that he laughed. You. At this moment, Xianyuan Jingqing was killed on the spot by the two guests behind him. Xianyuan Guiqi was stunned. Huang Fangfua had a good relationship with his son. Everyone in Mount Hui knew that they had a good relationship. But when did Hong Yu get to know Xianyuan Jingqing? Xianyuan Jingqing coughed violently. Hong Yu's martial arts cultivation today was all because of me. Xianyuan Jingqing isn't a bookworm. He wouldn't have just studied there for 20 years. Xianyuan Guiqi's heart was dead. Xianyuan Jingqing waved his hand at the two guests. Send him down the mountain. Xianyuan Guiqi was furious. He gritted his teeth and sneered. With just them? Xianyuan Jingqing smiled faintly. I knew it would be like this. Xianyuan Jingqing lowered his head and looked at his chest that was dyed red and black by blood. Dark clouds covered the sky above the snowfield. A huge and strange vortex appeared and covered the entire Mount Xiaoyao. This strange phenomenon was only a hair's breadth away from Qi Xuanjin's ascension. Xianyuan Jingqing slowly knelt down and said loudly, The heavens carry thousands of phenomena, the earth carries all living things, the heavens and earth empress. Xianyuan Jingqing kneels to the heavens and earth, begging for death. Xianyuan Jingqing begs for death. Xianyuan Jingqing's voice echoed. Not to mention Mount Huanyo and Mount Huanyo, even the nearly 10,000 Taoists of Mount Longhu could hear it clearly. The heavens and earth moved. Xianyuan Guiqi's expression was almost desperate. He unsheathed his simple ancient sword and flew out of the snowfield cliff, his figure flitting away in a panic. At the same time something poured down. It was a bolt of purple lightning. It was as thick as a mountain peak. Apart from Xianyuan Qingfeng's small piece of land, it was as if no matter how turbulent the world was, Xianyuan Jingqing as a father would protect a quiet and stable place before his death. The old god of swords brought Su Fengnian, Su Longxiang and Blue Bird, who were holding umbrellas and floated out of the snowfield. Xianyuan Pan wanted to jump off the snowfield, but was forcibly pulled back into the purple lightning pillar. Heavenly tribulation. It flashed and disappeared. On the vast snowfield, there was no sound of thunder, only wind and rain. In the end, only Xianyuan Qingfeng was left. He truly stood alone. Xianyuan Jingqing and Xianyuan Pan perished together. Not even their corpses were left. Not even ashes were left. After Xianyuan Qingfeng recovered from his daze, he let out a heart-wrenching, hoarse cry and collapsed in the rain. Su Fengnian slowly walked back to the snowfield, all sorts of feelings welling up in his heart. He saw Xianyuan Qingfeng curled up there and sobbing. Su Fengnian sighed and walked over to hold the umbrella for her. It wasn't for her, but because of what Xianyuan Jingqing had done, Su Fengnian deserved to do this for the daughter of the Confucian sage. The rain was still pouring heavily. She didn't get up, so Su Fengnian held the umbrella the whole time. The old god of swords, Li Chungang, stared at this scene with wide eyes. Then his eyes dimmed with loneliness, reminiscence. That year, when he carried that girl up the evil-slaying platform, it was also raining heavily, and he also held the umbrella. The world didn't know that this god of swords had been wronged by Qi Xianzhu. It didn't matter that the wooden horse and ox were broken, nor did it matter that he was left with only one arm. These weren't the reasons for Li Chuangang's great drop in cultivation. Even after being trapped under the Tide Listening Pavilion for 20 years, Li Chungang still couldn't walk out of his own prison. She was already invincible in the world, so what about herself? Li Chungang remembered her face when she died. At that time she couldn't say a single word. But now that he thought about it, wasn't it just, no regrets? Li Chungang walked to the edge of the snowfield. Behind him was a man and a woman holding an umbrella, just like the scene between him and the green-robed girl. When her chest was pierced by a sword, she said with a pale smile, If the heavens didn't give birth to you, Li Chungang, it would be boring. Li Chungang shouted, Swords come? All the swordsmen of Mount Insignia unsheathed their swords and flew toward the snowfield. The Taoists of Mount Longhu unsheathed their thousands of peachwood swords and flew toward Bull Mound. 2 waves of flying swords. They blotted out the sun. On this day, god of swords, Li Chungang once again entered the realm of a land sword immortal. Chapter 313. Su Fengnian used to be a pauper when he was practicing the knife. He ate and drank in the Golden Imperial Palace every day and even complained about being poor. He used the knife to move books as if he was moving mountains. Finally, his horizons were broadened. Although he heard from the white-haired old man that the flying sword beheading the head was a celestial supernatural power, he only treated it as a legend. How could he expect to witness it with his own eyes? At this moment, His Royal Highness raised his head to look at the 2 groups of flying swords that filled the sky. Staring at this scene, his scalp exploded and his blood vessels expanded. He was dumbfounded and muttered to himself, "Oh my God, I can't reward this technical work." The two guests who were lucky enough to escape looked at each other in shock. Shenyuan Jingqing, who entered the realm of Confucian Saint through a side door, had just been annihilated. How could there be another celestial sword? The old man who wore a tattered sheepskin coat and liked to pick his earwax was indeed the #1 swordsman in the past, Li Chungang. However, after Deng Tea appeared in the world and roamed the pugilistic world, he would occasionally make a move with the imposing manner of a half-demon half-immortal. Who would doubt that the old god of swords would be no match for the new god of swords? But the scene in front of them, forget about the hundreds of swords from Mount Huishan flying over. However, the thousands of peachwood swords from Mount Longhu were a few miles away from the bull gang. Not to mention the swords of the Taoist priests in the remote Taoist temples. How could they be summoned to the great snow field by the old man's words? Didn't they say that Li Chuangang's realm dropped greatly after his arm and sword was broken? Huang Fangfua and Hong Yuang did not think highly of him even if he fought with Shenyuan Pan, let alone Wang Xianji. However, the old man who had retired from the Jianghu for 20 years had reached the realm of prophecy. How could he be so mysterious? There was a secret in the Jianghu. The Confucian saint of the three sects had a vast aura that connected heaven and earth. Therefore his words contained the heavenly law. Just now, when Shenyuan Jingqing knelt to the Queen of Earth and said the words, "seeking death," it attracted the heavenly thunder that was as thick as a mountain range. The great immortal Jinren of Taoism could make prophecies come true. Therefore he could use the curse to kill demons and enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Many bodhisattvas of Buddhism had great wishes and their words could shake the 3,000 worlds. Li Chuangang's means were naturally not far off. As expected of a sword immortal. Su Fengyin, who was still holding the umbrella for Shenyuan Qingfeng, muttered to himself, "This sword descends from the heavens is very domineering. If it can even kill dragons and tigers, then it'll really be awesome. Let's see if those old Taoists still dare to be cocky." The old god of swords, who was facing the demon-slaying platform with his back facing the Crown Prince Palace, seemed to have heard Su Fengyin's nagging. His qi that was soaring into the clouds suddenly condensed, and more than 1,300 flying swords instantly fell into the cliff. He turned his head and said unhappily, "You're the only one who likes to show off. You should know that there is always someone better than you." And Mountain sect. The mountains north. And this old man has long past the age of being ruthless. Now he wants to take little Jiang as his disciple. So, it's a pity I didn't see her. Otherwise I would have a higher chance of taking her as my disciple. Su Fengyin wanted to tease the old god of swords for being useless. But he did not have the guts to do so. Su Fengyin heard about the Taoist head for the first time. He asked, "What's the Taoist head?" Li Chungang walked towards Bull Mansion and scratched his crotch. The rain was sticky and uncomfortable. He said, "The Taoist chief is the founder of Taoism and has the same status as the leader of Buddhism. It's just that this position is too hot. Those who are qualified to sit on this position have good temperament and are not willing to stand out. Those who want to be the Taoist chief are just small fries fishing for fame and compliments. Most of them are too close to the imperial court and don't have enough popularity. Therefore, in the past 100 years, except for Qi Xianzhu who deserves to be the Taoist chief, the rest of them can't be convinced by the public. As for the Buddhist sect, the white-robed monk Li Xiaoxin who traveled thousands of miles to the west to seek scriptures once had the chance to be the bodhisattva. Unfortunately, I heard that he went to get married and have a daughter. Therefore the Taoist head and the Buddha head are empty. The reason I'm telling you this now is because this old man sensed a few peaks in Mount Longhu when he was riding his sword on the snowy plains. The Taoist from the Taoist mansion stopped him and the Taoist from Jinjuan temple also interfered. This is not strange. What's strange is that the qi in Mount Yunjin was so abundant that it could be called fate, but it was not willing to do anything. Su Fengyin, who had been holding the umbrella to shelter Shenyuan Qingfeng from the wind and rain, gripped the handle tightly and said, "It must be that weird Taoist called Zhao Huangqiao. He claimed to be a member of the Liang imperial family who entered Mount Longhu to cultivate Taoism. When I was at the sword cliff of Mount Quanglu, he performed an out-of-body act and came here on a dragon. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. God knows if he has lived for 2 or 3 decades. This Taoist kept saying that he was enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. What a bold attitude." Su Fengyin would not elaborate on many details. After all, the battle between the dragon and the python was too obscure and mysterious. Besides, Shenyuan Qingfeng, an outsider, was present. Shenyuan Qingfeng, whose skirt was soaked in water under the umbrella, slowly came back to her senses. Her eyes were cold and emotionless. Some time ago, I went to Mount Yunjin to look for a flood salamander. I saw a middle-aged Taoist fishing in a deep lake. At that time, I thought his cultivation was mediocre and that he was pretending to be a hermit expert. At that time, this Taoist was discussing the scriptures of the three sects with Song Kelly, the heir of the Song family. He was very arrogant and called Saint Zhang of the North as Teacher Zhang. It was as if he was born 2,000 years earlier and dared to sit and discuss Taoism with the saint. Li Chungang frowned. Zhao Huangqiao of the three sects? This old man had never heard of him. Qi Xuanzhen also did not mention him in the 2 times he met him. However, with this Taoist cultivation, he was more than qualified to be the leader of the Taoists. Young Su, how did you offend this celestial? How could you make him go astray and not hesitate to show off his dragon ride? With this Taoist strength, he was able to live in seclusion in Mount Longhu for at least 100 years without making a name for himself. He was clearly not the kind of person who liked fame. His surname was Zhao and he was from the Son of Heaven. This old man understood. He was just concerned about the gathering and dispersing of the world's fate. Based on this, you should be grateful that Chao Changqing took Jianghu away early. Otherwise, if Zhao Huangqiao saw you and saw through the mystery, you would be in serious trouble. At Mount Kuanglu, with this old man's ability at that time, it would be useless even if he opened the gate of heaven. Su Fengyin smiled mischievously. So now. Chapter 314. The old man scolded, "Does this old man have nothing better to do than to stand up for you? Do you think fighting with celestial beings is a small matter? Celestial beings, dragon spirit travel, profound fate." Xianyuan Qingfeng felt a chill run down her spine. She used to be an arrogant and stubborn woman born in the most powerful family in the martial arts world, the only daughter of the first wife, and had a photographic memory. She could be counted as a small arsenal. Only the son of a top scholarly family like Song Kelly, who had real talent, could slightly subdue her. However, ever since this umbrella holder entered Jianghu, her entire life had been turned upside down. Her father had died just after showing off his celestial being style. The 3 people of the generation with the surname Jing, who were supposed to support Mount Hui's prestige for the next 50 years, were all dead. Xianyuan Dandan, who used to be a pillar of the sea, was killed. Her grandfather, Xianyuan Guiqi, was forced to jump off a mountain, and 2 guests turned against her on the snowy plains. If her father was here they could still behave, but now there was not even half a grandmaster left in Mount Hui. How could she control those guests of sacrifice who looked like monkeys when the tree did not fall, and who looked like wolves when the tree fell? Su Fengyin saw that this woman had no intention of getting up. Was she addicted to sitting on the ground? Xianyuan Qingfeng, you can't always make me hold the umbrella. Now that the bull gang is without a leader, it's the best time for you to show your ambition. Don't waste it. Xianyuan Qingfeng was speechless. Xianyuan Qingfeng struggled to get up. Perhaps because he had been sitting for too long, his legs were sore and he was about to fall back into the water. Su Fengyin tried to support him out of goodwill, but Xianyuan Qingfeng used all of her strength to push him away. She sneered, "Is it my ambition, or does your highness want to control Mount Huishan Xianyuan?" Su Fengyin sneered and said shamelessly, "Let's not beat around the bush. I like it. Since you're the one who started the conversation, why don't we have a good plan?" Xianyuan Qingfeng refused to back down. "Please speak," he said. The old god of swords ignored the scheming between the man and woman and walked straight to Bull descending manor. He walked up the steps and bent down to pick up the string of wind chimes. Su Fengyin spoke in a methodical manner, "You're just worried that this Shitzi will take over the magpie's nest and use you as a puppet. You'll only stop when I've emptied Mount Hui's hundreds of years of wealth, right?" Xianyuan Qingfeng said without hesitation, "That's right. Your Highness has a good family background and high standards. I believe your appetite will not be small." Su Fengyin laughed and said, "Xianyuan Qingfeng, oh Xianyuan Qingfeng, I don't mind telling you this. As long as you take the copies of those secret manuals into the Tide Listening Pavilion in Bailiang, I don't want anything else. Since we're doing business on the surface and I've accepted your benefits, I'll naturally help you secure your position as the head of Mount Hui. If anyone isn't convinced, you can let them have a taste of Bailiang's blade. Besides, the old god of swords is already a swordsman of the present era. It doesn't matter if you're a fox exploiting the tiger's might or taking advantage of others. Who would dare say no? Even if you don't want to stay in Mount Hui, no one will come into direct conflict with you. This is a business. Whether you're comfortable as the head of Mount Hui or not will depend on your own methods. When the time comes, if you need me to take action, you'll have to give me other benefits. When doing business, even blood brothers have to settle accounts clearly. What's more, we're enemies, aren't we? Xianyuan Qingfeng said coldly, Your Highness also said that we're enemies. Then what business are we doing? If worst comes to worst, Xianyuan Qingfeng will just go all out and leave this mess to my brothers. What's wrong with me leaving the mountain? Su Fengyan clicked his tongue and said, That's no fun. Your father, Xianyuan Jingqing, risked his life to create this situation. With your stubborn personality, how can you let it go? Who are you trying to fool? I'm not in the mood to beat around the bush with you. To put it bluntly, Mount Hui is in turmoil right now. If it weren't for the fact that I admire your father's actions, I wouldn't be so polite with a petty woman like you. Why would I stand here and hold an umbrella for you? Apart from your good skills in a fit of pique, what other skills do you have to show me? If you really piss me off, how hard would it be to support a puppet who's willing to be a lackey? Bailiang's hat of His Royal Highness isn't small, is it? Coincidentally, the few people that can't be suppressed by this hat are all dead. Su Fengyan observed Xianyuan Qingfeng's expression and said patiently, The Bull Gang can't beat the Dao Court's Mount Longhu in the first place. Now that you don't have me to back you up, won't you be suppressed for a few decades until you can't breathe? Besides, I'm Bailiang in the end. Aren't I going to leave soon? Once I leave, what are you worried about? If that's the case, then you're too useless. To tell the truth, the reason why I'm willing to let bygones be bygones and help you get promoted is because of that wooden sword Wenhua. He said that he'll use his sword to slap your little buttocks red when he learns superior swordsmanship. But once you leave the family, Wenhua won't go so far as to make things difficult for an ordinary woman with a miserable background. This prince won't be able to watch a good show. How boring. Xianyuan Qingfeng walked out of the umbrella and ignored Wenhua's teasing. He only asked, Miserable? Su Fengyan asked back, What do you think? Xianyuan Qingfeng asked, Are you pitying me? Su Fengyan didn't answer and only handed the umbrella to her. Seeing that she didn't move, he simply placed the umbrella on her shoulder and looked up at the dusky rain. If Wenhua were here, he'd definitely say that the heavens are pissing again. How naughty. Xianyuan Qingfeng was stunned. At this time, Hongyu took a few steps forward and got down on one knee. Young miss, from today onwards Hongyu is at your beck and call. Huang Fangfua said with a smile, I only want to continue studying at Mount Insignia and hope to reach Brother Jingqing's level one day. Whoever makes an enemy of young miss is also an enemy of mine. Xianyuan Qingfeng was stunned and didn't say anything. A loud voice came from the celestial master residence of Mount Longhu. Since Sword God Li has borrowed a sword and left, do you dare return it? Li Chungang, who was sizing up Feng Ling, couldn't be bothered to respond. Next, Xianyuan Qingfeng inadvertently saw His Royal Highness winking at the old sword god and mouthing two words. After seeing this, Li Chungang rolled his eyes and blurted out an extremely vulgar word in the direction of Mount Longhu. Bullshit. If that was all, Xianyuan Qingfeng wouldn't have done anything. What the old man who had become a terrestrial sword immortal said next was truly domineering. That's what Su Fengyan said. Xianyuan Qingfeng immediately smiled through his tears. Chapter 315. If Li Chungang said fart to the Taoist master's residence, outsiders would only say that the old god of swords' heroic spirit was still the same as before, especially after entering the threshold of Earth Immortal. They were full of confidence and could regard Li Chungang as an immortal swordsman. However, if it was Su Fengyan who said it, it would be a different story. Two great masters were fighting each other in the Great Snow Plains and the Taoist ancestral court, Longhu Mountain. Even if it was just a battle of words, it was still full of elegance. What was His Royal Highness doing? Su Fengyan could already imagine that for a long time, the whole Jianghu would become a big joke. Xianyuan Qingfeng, who was at a disadvantage in the scheming against His Royal Highness, could not help but gloat. She finally had some spirit and was no longer lifeless and haggard. Su Fengyan glared at her and took the lead to walk to the Great Snow Plains. Su Longxiang and Bluebird followed closely behind. Xianyuan Qingfeng hesitated for a moment, then walked slowly in the rain with Huang Fangfua and Hong Yuang. Hong Yuang was expressionless. Huang Fangfua thought a lot in this short section of the road in the rain. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the second foreign minister. Hong Yuang had always had a good reputation for his conduct and conduct. Not just anyone could claim the title of ancient style. Hong Yuang, as a foreign minister of Mount Huishan who came from a poor background, was not humble in front of others. This caused Xianyuan Qingfeng to treat him with respect. In private, Hong Yuang was called training a hawk instead of raising a dog. Hong Yuang was also not overbearing and never showed any complacency. However, no matter how Xianyuan Jingqing secretly supported and cultivated Hongyu these years, it was still Xianyuan Jingqing who brought him to the mountain. This time Hong Yu betrayed him on the Great Snow Plains and killed his benefactor Xianyuan Jingqing together. Huang Fangfo was shocked at that time. If this matter spread out, it would almost destroy Hong Yu's reputation for half of his life. If he was not careful, he would be labeled as a traitor. Huang Fangfo sneered in his heart. You Hong Yu can betray Xianyuan Jinggong's second branch today, will you betray your new master's first branch in the future? Hong Yu suddenly said. Hong Yu has something to tell Mississippi. Xianyuan Qingfeng nodded. Hong Tuo's tone was calm as he said, back then before Hong Tuo went up the mountain he was actually secretly invited by brother Yu Jingqing. That was why he made the decision to come to Mount Hui. Otherwise, with Hong Yu's experience and ability, he definitely wouldn't have the courage to come to the bull gang and become a laughingstock. Huang Fangfo narrowed his eyes. Xianyuan Qingfeng felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, and the knot in his heart was untied. He turned his head and smiled. Uncle Hong, you've suffered all these years. Hong Yu lowered his head and cupped his hands. That's how it should be. Hong Yu raised his head and looked directly at the young woman who was about to take control of Mount Hui. He said, but Hong Yu has received many favors from Emperor Xianyuan. Please treat the children of the second branch well. Xianyuan Qingfeng said softly, Uncle Hong, don't worry. Qingfeng isn't a narrow-minded woman. It's a fact that the second branch is powerful. Blindly purging dissidents will only cause the turbulent Mount Hui to fall apart. Qingfeng will do my best to appease the second and third branches. I won't change any of the established rules. Guests can stay if they wish but leave if they don't. Even if they leave the bull gang today, Mount Hui will still welcome heroes from all walks of life to come up the mountain again. The grudges of my father's generation with the surname Jing, as well as those above him, will completely end today. If the other two branches cause trouble, Qingfeng can promise you twice but not thrice. At that time if they still refuse to let it go, then don't blame Qingfeng for being ruthless. Xianyuan Qingfeng spoke lightly, but Huang Fangfo felt much more at ease. He was afraid that this woman would become arrogant and start a massacre in Mount Hui. When that time came, who would be the executioners? Wouldn't it be him and Hong Yu? Moreover, in this way he would have no room to maneuver and would be completely tied to her. This was originally a common method of controlling people. Logically speaking, it made sense. However, Huang Fangfo looked down on Xianyuan Qingfeng. Being in charge of a century-old aristocratic family was a strenuous job that could shake mountains and topple peaks. She only knew how to play petty tricks and was no different from a shrew with a loose tongue. She wasn't worthy of Huang Fangfo's loyalty. The most troublesome part was that Xianyuan Qingfeng's martial strength wasn't worth mentioning. Once the heir of Beiliang left, the more they suppressed her, the more likely it would be for him and Hong Yu when she rebounded in the future. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to suppress her even if they used all their skills. Walking to the entrance of the Bull Gang mansion, Su Fengyin stood under the eaves to shelter from the rain and looked back at the snowy plains. Xianyuan Qingfeng stood nearby. She tilted her head and smoothed out a few strands of hair that stuck to her cheek. She remained silent. The wind and rain gradually stopped. A young man with delicate features walked out of the mansion. Seeing everyone, he respectfully said to Xianyuan Qingfeng, "Yesterday, First Master gave me 4 brocade pouches. He said that after the rain stopped today, they would be given to His Royal Highness and 2 esteemed guests." Xianyuan Qingfeng was slightly surprised. Huang Fangfo and Hong Yu's expressions were especially solemn. Although they were serious, they weren't surprised. Clearly, this wasn't the first time they had received the brocade pouches. In fact, killing Xianyuan Jingqing on the snowy plains was a request for the brocade pouches. Huang and Hong didn't know beforehand that the other party had truly surrendered to Xianyuan Jingqing. Xianyuan Qingfeng and the other 2 received the brocade pouches from the young man. Huang Fangfo and Hong Yu immediately excused themselves and left the snowy plains. The 2 esteemed guests didn't exchange even half a word of pleasantries. Huang Fangfo returned to the small building. He returned a clean set of robes and personally burned incense. He took out the small scroll hidden in the brocade pouch. After repeatedly reading it, he gently tossed it into the red sandalwood incense burner. He smiled and murmured, "Brother Jingqing really didn't disappoint me. There were only a dozen or so words written on the exquisitely cut paper. It was just like what Xianyuan Jingqing usually said when he talked about writing. Zhongyi had said that simplicity was the end of poetry. Brother Huang, please stay in Mount Hui for 10 years and you can enter the Finger Shen realm." Huang Fangfo first smiled and then laughed out loud. "Xianyuan Jingqing, oh Xianyuan Jingqing, are you asking me to work for your daughter for 10 years? Since you said you could help me enter the Finger Shen realm, don't mention 10 years, I can even wait 20 years. After laughing, Huang Fangfo decided to study at Bull Hill for another 10 years. He believed that with Xianyuan Jingqing's meticulous planning, even if he couldn't enter the Finger Xin realm after reading all the secret manuals, Huang Fangfo was sure that another brocade pouch would appear at that time to solve his doubts. Huang Fangfo didn't even bother to think about who had the brocade pouch that he might not need in 10 years. With Xianyuan Jingqing's meticulous mind, he was afraid that Huang Fangfo wouldn't be able to find it even if he turned the entire Bull Hill upside down. When the time was not right, the mysteries of heaven would not be revealed. Huang Fangfo sighed, "Brother Jingqing, what a Confucian sage." Huang Fangfo is fascinated. Hong Piao had never stayed in the luxurious abode of the guest of Mount Hui. It was easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Therefore he chose to live in a secluded bamboo house on the mountainside. After opening the brocade pouch, his forehead was oozing with cold sweat. The general meaning of the brocade pouch was far less soul-stirring than the one given to Huang Fangfo. It was just that Xianyuan Jingqing kindly reminded Hong Piao. If Qing Feng had any grudges against Hong Piao for killing Xianyuan Jingqing, he could say that Hong Piao was invited by Xianyuan Jingqing to come up the mountain. Hong Piao, who was kneeling in front of the bamboo tea table, clenched his fists so tightly that the veins on the back of his hands popped out. When he, Hong Piao, went up to Mount Hui, it naturally had nothing to do with Xianyuan Jingqing. At that time, what he said on the snowy plains was just an idea he came up with on the spur of the moment. He played an unknown trick to eliminate Xianyuan Qingfeng's vigilance. Therefore, although this brocade pouch seemed to be a kind reminder, wasn't it also a kind of warning? Hong Piao took a deep breath and raised his head to look out the window. He smiled. Brother Jingqing is indeed an immortal. Hong Piao is completely convinced. The bull landed under the eaves. Su Fengyan looked at the rainbow stretching across the sky. One end of the rainbow was on the snowy plains, and the other end was on the Taoist master's residence. The scenery was absolutely beautiful. Su Fengyan opened the brocade pouch and was stunned. The words written on it were concise and to the point. His Royal Highness only needs to ask my daughter for a copy of the Aspiring Tripod Pavilion's Spring and Autumn Annals from my life. There is a letter in the envelope. At the end, there was even a sentence that went straight to the point. His Royal Highness did not let her down, and Mount Hui would not let His Royal Highness down. Xianyuan Qingfeng leaned against a pillar, his eyes hazy with tears. Hong Piao is rebellious and needs Qingfeng to convince him with force. It's better to use force than to show kindness. When Mount Hui is peaceful, he can be raised. When there is chaos, he must be killed. Huang Fang has a good reputation. I have my own plans. Within 10 years, this person will not have any disloyalty. After 10 years, if he wants to make a name for himself, there will naturally be someone to suppress him. I left a book for the Daoist children of Mount Longhu to give to your grandfather. Qingfeng, you don't have to worry about this matter. If Su Fengyan has endless evil intentions and wants a yard after taking an inch, you can go and find the Daoist who fishes for flood salamanders in Mount Yunjin. This immortal elder owes me a favor and has promised me to come out once. If Su Fengyan does not overdo it, this person can work together to seek benefits. During the Qingming festival, if your mother is unwilling to visit the grave, Qingfeng need not force her. Since we can't help each other in times of need, it is already a blessing in life to forget each other. Since the day you were born, I have buried a jar of wine under an old cassia tree. From then on, I have 1 jar every year. Now I have 23 jars. How about privately naming your daughter Hong? Don't blame me for nagging. It's just that I haven't been able to talk to you all these years. In the future, my grandson will be called Fuyao and my granddaughter will be called Yasong. How about it? All these years, I have been flipping through ancient books when I have nothing to do. I have 100 headaches, but I still can't think of a satisfactory name. I hope that in the future, if they want to study, then they can study. If they want to practice martial arts, then they can practice martial arts. The world is vast, but they can only stand on a small piece of land. Life is bitter and short. It's only 100 years, 36,500 days. Once you read it, destroy it. Remember. Su Fengyan watched as Xianyuan Qingfeng swallowed the paper in the brocade pouch. What a heartless woman. In the quiet courtyard of the eldest son's house, that woman also received a brocade pouch. However, the paper was completely blank. Chapter 316. After the Heavenly Master Manor's external surname Qi Xuanjin ascended, Mount Longhu rarely had a grand occasion where the 4 great Heavenly Masters gathered together. Even when the butcher Su Shao led several thousand iron cavalry to the foot of the mountain, the number 1 of the Longhu Hope generation, Zhao Shi, still didn't break out of seclusion. Of the 36,000 great heavenly cycle rituals of Xianxia, only 2 of the 4 great heavenly masters went. In the past 20 years, Zhao Danping became the prime minister of Xianxia in the capital. Together with Yue minister Zhao Danxia, the north and south reflected each other's splendor, meeting even less than they were apart. The imperial college's left chancellor Huan Wen and the current court's grand secretary Zhang Julu came from the same sect. Their Tao and politics aligned, the two were as close as brothers. However, on one matter their opinions differed. Everyone knew that Grand Secretary Zhang only respected Confucianism, belittled Buddhism and Taoism, while Huan Wen, who came from an orthodox Confucian background, greatly respected Elder Huang's tranquility. In the capital he had a deep friendship with Zhao Danping. Even though Zhao Danping was 1,000 li away from the Heavenly Master Manor, he still commanded Mount Longhu's rules and precepts, as well as the 2 great sections. Outside, Zhao Danxia commanded the world's Tao sects, but internally he only symbolically disciplined the teachings. As for the cultivation arts, in name, it was commanded by the old heavenly master Zhao Shi, but in reality, it was handed over to several people of the Jing generation to handle the specific matters. Zhao family's clan relative Zhao Jingchen was in charge of receiving guests at the manor gate. Bai Yu, who was bestowed with the purple title by the Son of Heaven, was in charge of theory and debate, frequently opening forums to preach. Xianxia, who was also an external Taoist like Sir White Lotus, was in charge of sword training, occasionally passing on sword techniques to Taoists of the Jing generation and below. The various branches of the Celestial Master residence were connected by the same breath and branch. They each enjoyed their own glory and complemented each other. That was why Mount Longhu was enjoying such a glorious time today. On the west side of the Jade Emperor Hall in the main hall of the Taoist Master residence, there was a long corridor of ancient tablets. One of them was a large green jade tablet that was 30 feet tall. It was moved here and erected by the 4th generation of the Dragon Tiger Mountain Grandmaster. The tablet was inscribed with the words, "Purple Cloud Blessed Land." It was rumored that the tablet was the same as the tablet of "Enjoying the Blessings of the Land Alone" in Mount Hui. At this moment, a Taoist wearing a noble yellow Taoist robe was standing on top of the tablet. He was looking at the snowfield of Mount Hui with a face full of anger. At the foot of the tablet, there were 3 old Taoists who were dressed in their own unique style. The oldest had snow-white hair, sandals and clean socks. He was only wearing an ordinary white Taoist robe. It was not very eye-catching, but at least he was wearing an ethereal alchemist's cloak, which vaguely gave him the aura of immortality. The second oldest Taoist was much more sloppy. He wore a thick green cotton robe that was stained with stains as if he was afraid of the cold. He wore a pair of thick-soled warm shoes and a cotton cloth wrapped around his legs. It made people wonder how this old Taoist was qualified to stand in the inner residence of the Taoist Master residence. The last one was frightening. Not only was his inner robe yellow, but he also wore a purple robe. It was extremely luxurious and noble. The direct descendants of the Taoist Master residence could wear yellow, which was the case for Zhao Jingchen and Zhao Ningyun. There were very few honorable Taoist masters in Mount Longhu who could wear purple, and Bai Yu belonged to this category. As for the Taoist master who could wear yellow and purple, there was no doubt that there was only one Taoist master, Zhao Danxia. The 4 Taoist masters with the same surname as the emperor, Zhao Shi, who had spent most of his life in seclusion trying to break through, Zhao Shituan, who was talented but indifferent, Zhao Danxia, who was the leader of Taoism, and Zhao Danping, who was good at writing poetry, finally met. The strange phenomenon on the snowy plains of Mount Zhaoyao fell into the eyes of the Taoist masters. It was Zhao Danping who stopped Li Chuangong's sword of prophecy from flying out of its sheath. It was also Zhao Danping who asked the old god of swords to return the sword. After hearing the reply, Zhao Danping was furious, while Zhao Shituan laughed uncontrollably. Zhao Danxia and his father, Zhao Shi, looked at each other and smiled. When Zhao Shituan was young he was not close to his nephew Zhao Danping. He always felt that this child was not likable since young. He was gloomy and did not have the magnanimity of a descendant of the surname Zhao. Therefore the old Taoist master did not hide his preference for Zhao Danxia. Zhao Shituan and Zhao Danping could be said to be the nemesis of fate. Although they were closely related by blood, they did not have a good expression when they met. This time, Zhao Danping left the capital to return home mostly to discuss with his brother how to deal with the latest political affairs of the imperial court. The empire's territory was restructured, and the original 24 districts of Taoism would have to follow suit and make changes. Moreover, after the position of Monk Zheng was established, Chongshen Bureau was very likely to leave Honglu Temple. The battle between Buddhism and Taoism, the battle of doctrines, and the battle of fate was on the surface. They could not be careless at all. A small part of the reason was that the crown prince of Bailiang had arrived at Dragon Tiger Mountain. In addition, the king of Bailiang, Su Xiao, had caused a huge commotion in the capital. Zhao Danping did not have a good impression of Su at all. It was possible that he did not have the intention to return to the Taoist master's residence to punish the young crown prince. Zhao Shituan said impatiently, "Zhao Danping, why are you still standing on the stone tablet of your ancestor? Li Chungang did not want to talk to you. It's useless even if you shout until your throat is hoarse. Why don't you use your flying sword and fight with Li Chungang on the snow field? I'll do my best to cheer for you." Zhao Danping snorted coldly and floated down from the stone tablet. Leaping over the top of the tablet was not appropriate. At that time he was angry at Li Chunggang's rude and unreasonable methods, so he did not care about his identity. Now that he had calmed down, Zhao Danping did not insist. Zhao Shi, who had been disturbed by Xianyuan Jingqing's forced breakthrough, put his hands in his sleeves and lamented, "This person risked his life to enter the demigod realm. It's really a pity. If he was willing to take it step by step, there's a chance that he could really ascend." Zhao Danxia, who had the most celestial aura, nodded and said, "After this battle, Hui Mountain's luck has been completely destroyed." Zhao Shi's face was full of sorrow. There's no door to misfortune, only man can summon it. The warning of the ancients must not be ignored. Dragon Tiger Mountain should take this as a warning. Danping. Chapter 317. Although Zhao Danping's temperament was extreme, but her martial arts skill, intelligence and talent were all first class in the present age. After hearing her father's rebuke, her original intention to argue with her uncle Zhao Shituan immediately dissipated. She calmed her heart and concentrated her spirit. Immediately the sharpness in her heart disappeared. She no longer showed any sign of wanting to compete with Li Chungang. The Taoist master mansion had been passed down for 1,600 years. Most of the time it was passed down from father to son. If the Taoist master had no children, he would be succeeded by his brothers and nephews. There was no precedent of a woman taking over. The previous sect leader, Zhao Shizi, had no children. Back then it was either his younger brother Zhao Shituan, his nephew Zhao Danxia, or Zhao Danping who took over the Qingji capital skill seal, the luck-suppressing sword and the Titan Emperor scripture. Back then the sect leader's opinion was not unanimous. Back on the mountain, there was an old ancestor of virtue and prestige who wanted Zhao Shituan to take over the responsibility. Zhao Shituan simply ran away from the mountain and went to Jianghu to live a carefree life. He said that it was better to pass on the legacy to Danxia than to him. That was how Zhao Danxia became the sect leader. The Taoist Master Mansion's Taoist Master Mansion was far from being the Taoist Master Mansion's Taoist Master Mansion. The latter had been recognized as the ancestral court of Southern Taoism for 500 years. After the death of Wang Zhongluo, Mount Wudong was just a Taoist Master Mansion. In the eyes of many Taoists on Mount Longhu, it was just a Taoist Master Mansion. How could it be compared to the Taoist Master Mansion? Fortunately, the Taoist Master Mansion improved under Zhao Danxia's leadership and became the leader of all Taoism in the world. Zhao Danping, who originally wanted to establish his own sect under the feet of the emperor, finally bowed his head. That was why his father, Zhao Shi, said that there was no blessing or disaster. Zhao Danping said coldly, that Li Chungang returning to the realm of Sword Immortal is a great feat, but he borrowed 1,000 swords from Mount Longhu on the snowfield. If this spreads out, where will the Taoist Master Mansion's face go? Zhao Danxia smiled softly and said, "Face is lost on Danxia. Let Danping pick it up in Beijing. Capable people do more work. Big brother, please excuse me." "Big brother, you're such a scoundrel. What are you doing?" Zhao Danping said helplessly. Her tone was no longer inflexible and stiff. After leaving Mount Longhu for so many years, how could it be that simple to write a poem by the emperor's side? After encountering many coincidences and comprehending the heavenly Tao, he was able to break through 100 armors with his horsetail whisk and compete with the black-robed monk Yang Taiji. Zhao Danping's personality gradually became more flexible. She was no longer as fierce as she was in the prime of her life, wanting to take others down with her at every turn. If it was more than 10 years ago, Zhao Danping would have already gone to Mount Hui to find trouble with Li Chungang. Mysteriously, the harmonious atmosphere in the Taoist Master Mansion today was largely due to Zhao Jingxi, who had a son in her later years. This child was ranked at the end of the Jing generation. Her talent in martial arts was mediocre, but she had the advantage of being as honest as jade. She was a junior who loved to express her feelings and was not scheming at all. Even the eccentric Zhao Shituan who did not see eye to eye with Zhao Jingxi would have to smile knowingly when he met Zhao Jingxi. Everyone in the Taoist Master Mansion liked to joke about some of Zhao Jingxi's embarrassing moments. What was even rarer was the few most outstanding people in the Taoist Master Mansion who did not share the same surname. For example, Bai Yu and Xianxia had gotten along well with Zhao Jingxi since they were young. The female Taoist nun who cultivated on the mountain was also happy to tease this Taoist Master Mansion's Zheng Huang. Even the female Taoist nun who was just a young girl dared to make fun of him. The old Taoist master Zhao Shituan said that Zhao Dongping's greatest merit and ability in this life was giving birth to such a son. Zhao Jingxi's biggest characteristic was that he was absent-minded. He would often be chatting with others one moment and then be in a daze the next. The people on the mountain were most afraid of him reading and looking for answers because no matter how thin the book was, he could read thousands of strange questions. Even the chief, Zhao Danxia, who was a patient elder, could be questioned to the point of being angry. Mr. White Lotus, who had hurt his eyes from reading, was not inferior to Zhao Danxia. He mocked himself for having 3 fears in life: afraid of thunder, afraid of walking, and afraid of Zhao Jingxi's questions. It was obvious how powerful Zhao Jingxi's questions were. Zhao Shituan clicked his tongue and said, "Old Manly has returned to the peak of the sword Dao. It is highly likely that he will have a battle with Wang Xianji." Zhao Shi stroked his beard and smiled. "It seems that the battle with Dong Tai will happen in the future." Zhao Danxia and Zhao Danping looked at each other and smiled. The 2 elders in the family were of the same generation as Li Chungang and Wang Xianji. Naturally, they had ulterior motives regarding Li Chuangang's entering into the celestial realm. With their high realm and status, it was difficult for them to find something to take a break from their busy lives except for concentrating on cultivating and attaining immortality and paying attention to the fate of Taoism. The Taoist master was unattainable to the common people. However, in the Taoist master residence, the Taoist master Zhao's clan, it was not much. After all, they were a family. It was the common view of a descendant looking at an elder. Zhao Shi waved his hand and said, "Danping, go ahead and tell Danxia about the important matters. It was not easy for me to climb out of the coffin and take a breather. I want to chat with your uncle." Zhao Danxia and Zhao Danping received the order and left the steel corridor. Zhao Shi looked at his brother and said sadly, "Every time we meet, we get old. Shituan, I don't know how many times I can see you in this life." Zhao Shituan said angrily, "You're so pretentious. If you don't go into seclusion, I'll see you every day and throw up when I see you." Zhao Shi shook his head and said, "Wang Zhonglo has cultivated the big yellow court, but I still can't ascend the Jade Emperor Tower that the old ancestor pointed out. I'm ashamed to face the ancestors." Zhao Shituan said angrily, "You don't have the face to face the ancestors because you can't ascend the Jade Emperor Tower and become a celestial? Then won't I anger the ancestors to the point that they have to ascend to the mortal world?" Zhao Shi smiled and said, "Let's not talk about this. How's your disciple's realm?" Zhao Shituan smiled and gave a thumbs up like a naughty child. "This? When do you go down the mountain?" "After defeating Qi Xuanzhen's black tiger, you can go down the mountain." "Good." Zhao Shi nodded and said, but then he was a little worried. In the last decennial debate on Lotus Peak, because the white-robed monk was busy, he didn't attend. Our Dao sect also had a hard time winning. If it wasn't for Bai Yu turning the tide, we might not have won. I heard that the 2 Zen temples this time was very strange. Not only did Li Dongxin and a few other virtuous eminent monks not take part in the debate, they even let a little monk represent the 2 Zen temples. That's right, Bai Yu mentioned that this little monk came to the celestial master residence with a young lady. Bai Yu said that the little monk is very intelligent. In the future, his achievements will be high and he might be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Li Dongxin. Zhao Shituan said with a headache, "I can't be bothered to worry about this. It's just a battle of words. It's boring to sit on Lotus Peak for a few days and nights under the sun. If it's not suffering, what is it? In the end, it's just a quarrel. There's nothing to be proud of even if we win." Zhao Shi said worriedly, "It's not a big deal at first. If we win, we win. We'll just take it as winning some face for our Dao sect. But now the imperial court's arrangement is very mysterious. It's like casting a wide net. If we win, it's fine. If we lose, the fate of the 3 sects will increase or decrease." Zhao Shituan said heartlessly, "If the elder ancestor didn't say something about making a small bet with someone, there wouldn't be this trouble. Brother, do you know who the elder ancestor is betting with?" "What's the bet? What's the bet?" Zhao Shi hesitated and said softly, "I only know that it's a bet between people with the same surname. They're betting on who will ascend later. The bet is a seal for a seal." The laziest Zhao Shituan felt a headache. Only the elder ancestor likes to mess around. If he was willing to ascend to immortality with Qi Xuanzhen back then, Qi Xuanzhen would have turned into a rainbow in broad daylight and I, Zhao Shituan, would have ascended on a crane. Zhao Shi smiled and said nothing. Zhao Shituan laughed. Actually, I know what the elder ancestor is thinking. Our Dragon Tiger Mountain is known to have a great immortal attaining Tao every 100 years. It's our fault for being so disappointing. If the elder ancestor had ascended earlier and no one attained immortality in the next 50 years, we would have lost a lot of face. I guess that's why he decided to bet with that person on who will ascend later. Zhao Shi stared and said, "Watch your words." Chapter 318. For some reason, Su Fengyin didn't walk into the treasure-filled bull descent. He just sat on the steps under the eaves with his brother Su Longxiang and Maid Bluebird standing behind him. His Royal Highness muttered to himself, and Xianyuan Qingfeng couldn't hear him clearly. Of course she couldn't guess that this Bailiang heir was moaning and groaning. After leaving Liangzhou, first the red armor talisman reappeared in Jianghu, then the sword crown and sword attendant of the Wu family sword tomb inexplicably blocked the way, not to mention the 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin, who wanted to take away the head. Then Chao Changqing took away Jiang Anai and Gangnam-do and continued eastward. At Quanglu Mountain he even met Zhao Huangqiao, who was in the celestial being's astral body state. When he finally reached the Daodu's Longhu Mountain, there were Confucian saints and sword immortals in the great snow plains. Su Fengyin believed that he was diligent in practicing his saber, but any one of these guys didn't even have the qualifications to fight to the death. That kid Wenhua said that there was no reason to always be attacked in Jianghu, but when he met these guys he had no choice but to be attacked. At this moment, Su Fengyin finally understood why the bull rider was as timid as a mouse. It was right not to go down the mountain. With Hong Shixiang's identity, going down the mountain so easily was like carrying a large signboard with the words, "Come and hit me," written on it. This Jianghu's experts had their own experts to deal with. A Vajra realm martial artist seemed to be able to do whatever he wanted, but what if a Finger Shin realm martial artist found him an eyesore? A Finger Shin realm expert was awe-inspiring, but a heavenly image realm thousand-year tortoise would come out of the pond to teach him a lesson. Was a heavenly image realm invincible enough? Didn't Xianyuan Dandan study for his grandson Xianyuan Jingqing and become an earth immortal? After 100 years of hard work, he didn't even leave behind a handful of ashes, let alone a complete corpse. Su Fengyin lay on the ground, sighing again and again. Jianghu was dangerous. Xianyuan Qingfeng waited for a long time, but Royal Highness didn't return. Finally he said impatiently, "Your Highness won't enter bull descent? The things here are too dirty. Qingfeng will definitely not take anything away. Your Highness can take whatever you want." Su Fengyin still did not respond. After a long while an unfamiliar young girl walked out of the mansion. She had the same demeanor as the young man who had previously delivered the brocade pouch. She said softly, "First Master instructed this servant to deliver a brocade pouch if your Highness does not submit to the bull." Su Fengyin finally regained his senses. He rolled his eyes and said, "Are you done yet?" While muttering to himself, he hastily took the brocade pouch and opened it to take a look. He waited until the young girl had walked back to Yunyu Town before whispering to Xianyuan Qingfeng, "Your father said that there's a treasure house in Yunyu Town. The door was made by the Mahis School of Shangyin Academy and is indestructible. The male and female Jiao salamanders are the inner and outer rings. If you want to enter, you have to drip a drop of blood into the male Jiao salamander's mouth. The male Jiao salamander will then drill through the door and swim through the mechanism to meet the female Jiao salamander. If your Xianyuan bloodline is broken, won't no one be able to open it?" Xianyuan Qingfeng frowned. "What do you want, Your Highness? To tell you the truth, the male Jiao salamander died last year. I went to Yunjin Mountain to look for a new one, but I couldn't find one. Since the young prince is studying at Mount Longhu, I believe Your Highness must have a good relationship with the Taoist Master's mansion. I heard that the Taoist Master's mansion raises several Jiao salamanders in the Dragon Pond. Your Highness might as well ask for one of them to be given to Mount Huishan. The treasure house can be considered a reward from the Xianyuan family for Your Highness's hard work in coming to the mountain." Xianyuan Qingfeng's face was filled with mockery as he spoke. It was obvious that he wanted to make a fool of himself. He had clearly taken advantage of his Royal Highness' weakness when he used the old God of Swords to say "fart" to the Taoist Master's mansion. Su Fengyin, who was lying on the ground, cast a sidelong glance at Xianyuan Qingfeng. He said lazily, "What? You think I don't dare to ask for a Jiao salamander? If the Taoist Master's mansion isn't willing to give it to me, then I'll snatch it. If I can't snatch it, then I'll steal it." If I can't steal it, then I'll talk nicely and beg for it. Shenyuan Qingfeng's lips curled into a subtle arc as he said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Your Highness doesn't bother with trifles when doing things. In the future you will inherit the title of Northern Liang King. As long as you use this method to deal with the Northern Ming dynasty, you will definitely be able to achieve victory and leave your name in history." Su Fengyin stood up, pretending not to hear the mockery in her voice. "I'll take your auspicious words." Su Fengyin then changed his expression and smiled warmly. "Not only does the brocade pouch say that there are several items in the treasure house that can catch my eye, it also says that there's an item outside the armory that's even more precious than an entire mountain. It asks me to treasure it well. The words on the brocade pouch are, 'Far in the horizon, yet close in front of you.'" Shenyuan Qingfeng's expression changed slightly. Su Fengyin laughed heartily and jumped down the steps. "Silly girl, your father is willing to give you to me? Besides, even if he's willing to give you to me, I'm not willing to accept you. You don't have any breasts or buttocks and you're always wearing a bitter face. You can see female ghosts when you look in the mirror." Shenyuan Qingfeng stared at Su Fengyin's back with a complicated expression. As they approached the edge of the snowfield, Bluebird whispered, "Young master." Su Fengyin had a telepathic connection with her and knew what she was thinking. He smiled and explained, "It's not that I'm deliberately making things difficult for Shenyuan Qingfeng, but this woman won't listen to your kind words. If you really want to confide in her, I'm sure she'll treat your kind intentions as ill intent. If you really think I covet her beauty or her family fortune, wouldn't I die of injustice?" Ignoring the gloomy Shenyuan Qingfeng, His Royal Highness had just descended the snowfield when he saw a large group of people kneeling in front of him. There were no less than 30 people. Su Fengyin only needed to think for a moment to realize what was going on. He held down Xiao Chunlei and looked down at them with a smile. "Oh, you all know how to sail according to the wind. You're in a hurry to serve me so you can go to Beiliang and ride roughshod over them? This matter is fine, but I'll say the ugly words first. If you really have some ability, I won't send you away like your beggars. I don't care if you used to be a wanted criminal or a thief. My rice bowl is very big. Not to mention a few dozen people, even a few hundred people will be full. However, if you don't have any ability and want to eat and drink for free, I don't care if you're a guest of Mount Hui or some martial arts hero from which path, scram. Once you're caught, I'll take your heads to the authorities to exchange for some money." Most of the Jianghu people who relied on Mount Hui were stunned. Wasn't this Beiliang heir a bit too ignorant and incompetent? How could his words be more straightforward than a thief? At that moment, a dozen or so fence-sitters stood up cautiously and tried to change their minds and leave. Half of these people were proud and arrogant and didn't want to be bullied. The other half were just here to make up the numbers. They wanted to go to the wealthy Beiliang heir and ask him to live a luxurious life. This group of people didn't have a high status in the Great Bull Gang. They belonged to the category of nobodies who weren't loved by their grandmothers and uncles. They wouldn't be able to obtain the most lucrative position of a guest of Mount Hui. Normally, not to mention an entire secret manual, even if it was just a single page, they would fight until their heads bled. Those who had relatively good relationships with each other were also deceiving each other. Those who weren't of noble status could only borrow secret manuals from the aspiring Cauldron Pavilion for a limited period of time. They couldn't take it out of the pavilion. If someone secretly copied it, they would be expelled from Mount Hui once they were discovered. Many martial arts heroes who had similar martial arts styles would each memorize the manuals by rote. The more the better. After the event, they would exchange secret manuals with each other. Those with slightly bad intentions would say a few more words at a critical juncture. This wouldn't cause the other party to go crazy, but it would cause the other party to take a detour. There were only a few dozen guests of Mount Hui. Su Fengyin actually became absent-minded at a time like this. This was because he didn't want to stay on Mount Longhu any longer after hastily settling the affairs of the Great Bull Gang. He was going to head to the northeast of the Jian province. Martial Emperor City. Chapter 319. Shenyuan Qingfeng walked back to the courtyard where the eldest son's quarters were. The glazed fish tank in front of the courtyard had been destroyed. Looking up at the plaque, he saw that his father, Shenyuan Jingqing, had written the Flask of Eternal Spring. Passing through the hall, there was the Imperial Library, where Shenyuan Jingqing had spent almost all of his time as a teenager. There were more than 6,000 scrolls here, but it was completely different from the aspiring Cauldron Pavilion. There were very few martial arts manuals here, but they were all classics of the 100 schools of thought. The small building was simple, but the windows were bright and clean. The top floor had a wide view from where one could observe the South Star and the Big Dipper. At the back there was a Lingji courtyard with a small facade. On both sides of the courtyard were small and narrow side rooms. Originally, it was meant to provide lodging for the maids and servants. It was just that the main wife's courtyard was deserted, and that woman's temperament was cold and she did not like noise, so she left behind a personal maidservant. The side rooms were all used to store sundries. Many of the poems and essays that Xianyuan Jingqing had written when he was young to express his grievances were thrown into piles by her, scattered all over the table, chairs and floor. There was a pair of male and female 1,000-year-old luohan pines on the side of the corridor. Their roots were intertwined and their crowns were juxtaposed, making this place seem even more desolate and unsettling. Xianyuan Qingfeng walked further into the rear hall of the woman's private quarters. There were originally countless paintings and couplets, but they had all been removed by her. Only a large plaque hung in the middle of the hall that read, "Better to leave than to come." It was probably because she used too much effort to move them that she was able to survive. Xianyuan Qingfeng walked to the tea room with a view of the Dragon King River and saw that she was sitting quietly with a pile of ashes beside her. There was only a white jade scroll left of a painting. Xianyuan Qingfeng said coldly, "Father killed the old ancestor as a land god." Xianyuan Jingqing was ambushed by Huang Fengfua and Hong Yu. Grandfather was expelled from the mountain. Beiliang's heir, Su Fengnian, killed more than 10 people in one breath outside the snowfield. He had the light cavalry and retainers hang their corpses in front of the Yi sect of Mount Hui. He declared that he wouldn't accept anyone from Mount Hui. Now, 3 or 4 of the 10 guests of Mount Hui are gone. As for the rest of the Jianghu people, most of them have chosen to leave the mountain. Only in front of her daughter, Xianyuan Qingfeng, would the woman not be so cold and distant. She smiled gently and said, "Isn't this the perfect time for Qingfeng to take over Mount Hui?" Xianyuan Jingqing had swept clean the great snow plateau, and with Beiliang's crown prince eyeing him covetously, it could be said that there were internal and external troubles. Those ministers of resurgence in the history books all stepped forward bravely at this time to turn the tide. Only then could they make people feel grateful and fearful at the same time, controlling the people's hearts. It was just the 4 words of combining kindness and power. If Mother didn't guess wrong, Xianyuan Jingqing had already reached a secret agreement with His Royal Highness. Aside from Huang Fengfua and Hong Yu, the 2 open chess pieces, there were still some hidden chess pieces that were biding their time, right? What Mother was most curious about right now was whether His Royal Highness had asked for an exorbitant price to make things difficult for Qingfeng. If she married into Beiliang Palace as a concubine, it was not impossible. With Mount Hui's Xianyuan family's several hundred years of foundation as a dowry, there weren't many women in the world who could afford such a large sum, right? The woman's voice was soft and gentle, very pleasing to the ear, but the meaning behind her words was chilling to the bone at this moment. Xianyuan Qingfeng couldn't stop laughing and actually laughed until tears came out. She wiped her tears and said, "I've disappointed Mother. That His Royal Highness doesn't care about Mount Hui, not to mention Xianyuan Qingfeng who can't even get into the Rouge Review. Mother, you can only blame yourself for not giving birth to a more beautiful Qingfeng back then." The woman didn't get angry and only quietly waited for Xianyuan Qingfeng to finish laughing. Seeing her daughter's unstoppable tears, she reached out to help wipe them away, but Xianyuan Qingfeng fiercely slapped her hand away. She still didn't take it to heart and gently said, "Rats go into hiding because of grain, dogs go into hiding because of poverty. It's a pity that this only applies to the small families. Although Mount Hui's fate has been greatly damaged, it doesn't mean that they won't be able to recover from this setback. What Bullock Gang encountered today is still somewhat better than what happened 100 years ago when the Wu family sword tomb's first-rate experts almost all died in Beimang." Beiliang's heir hung up the corpses to intimidate everyone and was clearly building momentum for Qingfeng. If it's as you said that heir's ambitions aren't in Mount Hui, that's even better. After he leaves with his troops, if Qingfeng feels that he's short of money and can't control the situation, you can ask Mount Longhu for some protection. The Celestial Master residence and Bullock Gang have always been linked for several hundred years. A close neighbor is better than a distant relative. Xianyuan Qingfeng sneered and said, "In the end you're still asking for help." The woman murmured softly, "In life one must ask for help from heaven, earth, king, father and mother. Who doesn't ask for help?" Xianyuan Qingfeng said expressionlessly, "That heir left more than 100 light cavalry at Mount Hui. He said they were responsible for transporting the copies of the aspiring tripod pavilion's secret manuals back to Beiliang." The woman smiled and said, "Xianyuan Jingqing once said something that I've remembered. A man's talent is 10,000 pounds, but it can't compare to a woman's chest. From what I can see, His Royal Highness clearly still has feelings for Qingfeng. It doesn't matter whether or not she's Beiliang's side consort. A noble family's wealth isn't necessarily a blessing for a woman. But if we can use this opportunity to stabilize Mount Hui, that's the most important thing right now. Mother said one more thing. No matter how talented that Yuan Tingshan is, don't meet him in the future. No matter how great a martial artist's achievements are, they can't compare to a single word from the heir of Beiliang. In the short term you can only get close to the heir of Beiliang and not alienate him. As for the long term, just take one step at a time. It's like playing chess. Qingfeng can't be in a hurry to place a piece. Xinyuan Qingfeng was lost in thought. He poured himself a cup of wine which was still warm and fragrant. He raised his head and took a big gulp. The woman, who was no longer young, had a gentle gaze. She smiled and said, "A cup of osmanthus wine in your mouth will bring 2 peach blossoms to your face." Xinyuan Qingfeng said calmly, "This was written by father." She said calmly, "Xinyuan Jingqing said so much and wrote so much. There's bound to be a few sentences that you remember. The ancient records say that Mount Zhaoyao has many ancient osmanthus, but there weren't many left when mother came up the mountain. Among them the tangeray is the oldest and the most luxuriant. Every autumn the osmanthus seeds would fall like rain. It's glorious but not charming." She hesitated for a moment and said slowly, "Just like how Xinyuan Jingqing conducts himself." Xinyuan Qingfeng gripped his cup tightly and stared at her. He clenched his teeth and said, "Isn't it ironic to say that my father is good now?" She said calmly, "Mother, have you ever said anything bad about Xinyuan Jingqing?" Xinyuan Qingfeng bit the corner of his mouth so hard that blood seeped into the cup. He asked with a trembling voice, "Mother, have you ever liked father even a little bit?" She shook her head and said, "I don't know." Xinyuan Qingfeng sneered like a madman. "Then you've never liked him. Poor father studied for you for 20 years, only to learn that you're the funniest immortal on earth in the last 1,000 years. She didn't refute. Xinyuan Qingfeng threw away his cup and suddenly stood up. With his back to her, he said in a deep voice, "Mother, don't worry. Father spent a lot of effort to create this situation. Qingfeng will definitely risk my life to make sure that Mount Huishan doesn't fall so that mother can live a peaceful and stable old age." She still didn't say anything. She waited until Xinyuan Qingfeng left the courtyard before slowly standing up. She picked up the hot wine pot and walked straight to the snowfield without feeling the pain. The sky cleared after the rain, and the scenery on the snowfield was pleasant. She came to the cliff and revealed a beautiful smile that no one had ever seen before. "Jingqing, I won't be angry with you anymore." She leaped. Chapter 320. Before His Royal Highness left Mount Longhu, he left behind a treasure of calligraphy for the Taoist temple. There were a total of 3 horizontal plaques, and the wood was old peach wood that was chopped down from the mountain. The old Taoist master Zhao Shituan was so happy that he rubbed his hands and stood at the door for a long time. The horizontal plaque was Kunlun, the east plaque was Immortal Mansion, and the west plaque was Nanjia Zhou Cheng. In terms of strength it might not be as good as the works of the Taoist masters of Mount Longhu, but its spirit was not inferior at all. To be honest, the small Xiaoyao temple originally did not deserve to hang these 3 plaques, but the old Taoist master liked it and did not care if the Taoist masters were secretly criticizing it. Zhao Shituan grinned and flattered. The old ancestor said that the horizontal plaque is the symbol of a family. If the words are written well, the momentum is weak. It's only to decorate the facade and make the writing vivid. "Your Highness, this is a great gift. I'll definitely steal a flood salamander from the Dragon Lake tonight and send it to Mount Huishan." "Oh right, Your Highness, are you sure you don't want to go to the Taoist master's residence for a cup of tea and a vegetarian meal? If you don't enter it won't sound good. It's also not the way our Mount Longhu treats guests." Su Fengyin was about to go to Qinglong Creek to take a boat and leave the ancestral court of Taoism. His younger brother Huang Man'er, who was standing beside him, clenched his sleeves tightly. He touched Su Longxiang's head and shook his head. "I'm not going. I heard that great Taoist master Zhao Danping is rushing back to Mount Longhu. I'm afraid that if there's a disagreement and they fight, you'll be in a difficult position." The old Taoist master sighed with emotion. "Your Highness is a kind person. The 4 generations of ancestors once planted a chestnut forest on the mountain. I didn't expect Your Highness to leave in such a hurry. Otherwise it would be good to fry some chestnuts and bring them along for a taste." Su Fengyin shook the bag of hawthorns that Huang Man'er picked and smiled. "These are enough. What's more, I heard that this chestnut forest is only a few acres of land. Every year, the Taoist master's mansion will distribute it to the influential pilgrims and high-ranking officials. Your Zhao family can't even eat a few chestnuts, so I won't be annoying." The old celestial master said self-deprecatingly, "No one cares about the poor in the bustling city, while the rich have distant relatives deep in the mountains. That's how it works. People come and go at Mount Longhu all year round, and they're all trying to get close to each other. To put it nicely, there are no strangers coming and going, but to put it bluntly, they're all sucking up to each other. That's why I'd rather stay in this small Taoist temple. The juniors in Celestial Master Mansion are all dressed in yellow. Those brand new Taoist robes are beautiful, but in my eyes they are like human skins. Sai, let's not talk about this. How unlucky. Your Highness, let's go. I'll send you on the boat. Huang Man, can rest assured and leave him to me. I won't let anyone bully this disciple. If one day Huang Man'er wins a fight against that psychic beast on the devil-slaying platform, I'll personally send him back to Bailiang. However, there's something I need to make clear to your Highness. Huang Man'er was born as a Vajra, so his talent can no longer be described as extraordinary. He and the new leader of Wudong are both Xiantian celestial beings. That young leader has no problem entering celestial phenomenon. He has been cultivating wholeheartedly on Mount Wudong for more than 20 years. In the end, he was following the general trend of the heavenly Tao. Huang Man'er, on the other hand, is different. Su Fengyin chuckled and said, Xianyuan Jingqing said the same thing on the Great Snow Plateau. Zhao Shituan was relieved. He was worried that His Royal Highness would mistakenly think that he had the selfish intention of teaching his disciple to starve his master to death. Su Fengyin looked at the troops beside him. Only Big Halberd Ningame from the Phoenix Battalion appeared. This elite light cavalry unit would be temporarily stationed at Mount Huishan. On one hand, they had to inventory the treasures in Bull Falls treasury. Su Fengyin had no reason to refuse Xianyuan Jingqing's brocade pouch. They also had to transport copies of secret manuals from the Aspiring Cauldron Pavilion to supplement the Tide Listening Pavilion in Bailiang Palace. With this, the Tide Listening Pavilion's martial arts library was even more worthy of its name. The martial arts manuals in Jianghu were as vast as the sea. The Tide Listening Pavilion had already collected most of them. After the Aspiring Cauldron Pavilion had taken everything, only the Wu family's sword mound and the Dongyue sword pool were left there. As for the other layer of meaning, Su Fengyin and Xianyuan Qingfeng had a tacit understanding. After Bull Fall overturned the situation, she became the mistress of Mount Huishan as a woman. To a large extent, her status was not legitimate. The second and third branches had pledged their loyalty to the two brothers, Bailiang and Xianyuan Jingxian. Xianyuan Qingfeng's direct descendants and trusted aides could be counted on one hand. Giving her 100 light cavalry units to use as a banner was equivalent to sending charcoal in snowy weather. Su Fengyin hesitated for a moment, then smiled at Ningame. Those in the Phoenix Battalion who have martial talent and are willing to practice martial arts can stay on Mount Huishan without escorting the books down the mountain. I've already spoken with Xianyuan Qingfeng. The Aspiring Cauldron Pavilion's secret manuals can be read at will, as long as they don't leak out of Jianghu. Remember, you're at Bull Fall, not living under someone else's roof. There's no need to lower your voice and look at other people's faces. However, you also can't be too domineering and unreasonable. We're like turtles occupying a magpie's nest. In short, General Ning can do whatever he wants in Mount Huishan. There's no need to report to me. Chapter 321. The halberd Ningame cupped his fists and said in a deep voice, Yes, Your Highness. I won't let you down. Su Fengyin saw that the burly general with a soft voice wanted to say something but stopped. He smiled and said, If you have something to say, just say it. There's no need to follow the rules. The general, who never frowned when charging into enemy lines, blushed slightly. He turned around and said respectfully to the elderly god of swords, Ningame has benefited a lot from senior's guidance on halberd techniques. I will never forget it. The old man with the sheepskin fur coat said impatiently, Why are you thanking me? Do you think you can repay my kindness with your trivial skills? Since that's the case, you might as well keep it in mind. Ningame blushed immediately and was at a loss. He was obviously not as thick-skinned as His Royal Highness. Su Fengyin ignored him and looked around. Other than Blue Bird, who was on his side, Yu Wei, who was playing with the white cat Wu Meinyang with her slender fingers, could be considered half a member. Murong Wuzhu and Murong Tonghuang had special identities. This pair of brother and sister, who were said to be devastatingly beautiful in the prophecy, were no longer worried. With the death of the old Xianyuan Great Pan, the pressure of Mount Hui was no longer there. The sibling spirits had changed. Not to mention Murong Wuzhu, who had no opinions and only knew how to go with the flow. Even the gloomy Murong Tonghuang looked relaxed. He had a leisurely attitude as if he was going on a trip. He felt that even if the sky collapsed, His Royal Highness would be there to support him. He only needed to watch the show. As for Princess Jing en Pei Nanwei, she seemed to have completely accepted her fate after hearing about the battle at Great Snow Plateau. Of the 4 retainers from Liangzhou, Lu Qiantang had died in the battle. Old Mi Wei Shuyang had to stay on the mountain to select secret manuals. Now, only Xu Xiu and Yang Qingfeng were left to follow them to Martial Emperor City. Su Fengyin boarded the boat and sailed out of Qinglong Creek. Huang Manor and the old Heavenly Master sailed the raft to Longwang River before turning back. Su Fengyin gave a tiger Kuei Vajra to his younger brother. After waving goodbye, he sat on the bow deck, not daring to look at his younger brother's figure. The female tiger Kuei Bodhisattva squatted beside His Royal Highness's feet and whimpered softly. Su Fengyin leaned against the ship's railing and placed a handful of hawthorns in the space between his knees. He tossed one into his mouth, which tasted slightly sour. There were 4 brothers and sisters in Beiliang Palace. The eldest sister, Su Fengyin, had married into Gangnam-do. Her mother had passed away early, so she treated His Royal Highness with nothing but doting. Even if she met a man she truly liked in the future and had to choose between her younger brother Su Fengyin and her husband, she would not hesitate to protect her younger brother. The second sister, Su Weisheng, was extremely talented. Not to mention Su Fengyin, even Su Xiao was a little afraid of her ability to persuade people with reason. However, her relationship with Su Fengyin had always been very good. It was just that the way she behaved was different from how Su Fengyin and his eldest sister stuck together like glue. The more Su Weisheng cared for him, the stricter her demands were. It was as if she was setting an example and doing everything to the best of her ability. She would not stop until Su Fengyin did better. Among the 4 of them, Su Weisheng was the most stubborn. Undoubtedly, she was the most accomplished and the most famous. Perhaps the world could not imagine that a woman like her, who had suppressed all the heroes in Shangyin Academy, was just a girl who acted coquettishly and shamelessly with her younger brother. Younger brother, Su Longxiang? Su Fengyin remembered when they were hunting when they were young. The 2 brothers had left the cavalry and encountered a giant bear that was as strong as a small mountain. It was the 10-year-old Huang Man'er who stood in front of them and tore the beast apart. Every winter, Su Fengyin's favorite thing to do was to hold Huang Man'er's feet upside down and write on the snow. Usually it was the second sister, Su Weisheng, who improvised the poem, while his eldest sister applauded and cheered. However, no one in the world knew that the widely popular poem, a poem written by a sword in the snow of Liangzhou, was not written by Su Weisheng with her sword, but by His Royal Highness with the little prince's head. At that time, the happiest person was none other than Su Longxiang. The 4 siblings who were once carefree had unknowingly left each other. A Dragon King River ship approached, interrupting His Royal Highness's sorrowful thoughts of parting. Shenyuan Qingfeng boarded the ship alone and walked towards Su Fengyin. Su Fengyin chewed on a hawthorn and expressionlessly asked, "I heard your mother jumped off a cliff." She calmly said, "I forced her to her death." Su Fengyin frowned and said, "Since the people involved are all dead, could Miss make the final judgment and clear up my doubts?" Shenyuan Qingfeng must have a heart of stone. She did not have the slightest intention of hiding the truth for the deceased's elders. It was as if she had held it in for more than 10 years, and if she did not say anything now, she would become a madwoman. She squeezed out a smile that was difficult to tell whether it was relief or desolation and slowly said, "My father loved her, but he never asked for anything in return. As for my mother, she probably didn't even know whether she loved or hated him. As long as my father stayed at Bull Hill, she had a reason to continue living. Whether she deceived herself or others, she could continue to struggle at death's door. Once my father died and I took control, she had no reason to continue living. Since that was the case, why not let me, as her daughter, break the final paper?" Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "I don't understand you." Shenyuan Qingfeng stared at His Royal Highness, who did not match the rumors, and calmly said, "Qingfeng doesn't understand you either." When Su Fengyin saw Li Chenggang walk out of the cabin, he suddenly said, "Haha miss, don't hide." A young girl, whose hands and feet were pressed tightly against the ship's bow, jumped into the river and disappeared in a flash. She chuckled and said, "So what if you're a land immortal?" Chapter 322. The Huishan sisters' waterfalls were stacked on top of each other. When the last waterfall poured down, the sound of the waterfall could be heard from half a mile away. A young man was sitting below with his upper body exposed. He used his back to withstand the torrent. His skin turned from red to purple from the impact. In the misty water, a rainbow was reflected above his head. The large pool was covered in moss and tall trees. The scenery was beautiful and gentle. A middle-aged Taoist came and went without alerting any of the sentries in Huishan. He came near the waterfall and looked at the young man from afar. He saw that the young man's body was on the verge of collapsing. If he continued to resist, his lungs would be injured. The nameless Taoist waved his sleeve and pulled the young man out of the waterfall. It was the machete man Yuan Tingshan who was treating his injuries with poison. His eyes were gloomy. A blade tied to his wrist jumped out of the water like a green dragon. With the blade in hand he could kill the enemy at any time. Yuan Tingshan's caution was evident. However, when Yuan Tingshan saw the person's face, he immediately knelt on the rock beside the pool even though he was famous for being heartless in Huishan. He said loudly, "Julu's Yuan Tingshan greets the Immortal Senior. Yunjin Mountain's Immortal Senior has rewarded me with a few celestial fruits. I will remember your kindness." The middle-aged Taoist who fished once every 10 years in Mount Longhu waved his hand and said, "I only came to Huishan's great snow field to send Xinyuan Jingqing off. I saw that you were going astray and recovering from your internal injury, so I took the liberty to intervene. Don't blame me for doing something unnecessary." Yuan Tingshan smiled and showed his white teeth. He said, "I don't dare." The Taoist saw that the young man's words were extremely respectful, but his right hand was holding onto the hilt of his blade. He did not take it to heart and just smiled. He lamented, "Julu is a place where people converge. If Kunlun is the dragon's head and Donghai City is the dragon's tail, then Julu is the dragon's horn. The people here are either evil or virtuous. There are very few mediocre people here." Yuan Tingshan half knelt on the rock and looked straight at the Taoist. He said slowly, "I'm short-sighted and don't know these things. I just couldn't stay in Julu, so I came out to beg for a living. I've heard that the celestial masters of Mount Longhu are proficient in divination and physiognomy. Could it be that celestial master is an elder from the celestial master residence?" The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and did not deliberately mystify. Instead he said frankly, "Although my surname is Zhao, I'm not from the celestial master mansion." He only borrowed the blessed land of Mount Longhu to cultivate and did not concern himself with worldly affairs. He treated it as accumulating some good fortune for his descendants and accumulating some good karma. As a result, my Tao heart is impure and I have been mediocre for many years. Although Yuan Tingshan was uncouth and did not know many characters, he was smart enough to hide his disappointment when he heard that the Taoist was not a noble from the Taoist master mansion. He said loudly and humbly, "Immortal Senior, you are obviously a celestial being like an immortal on the land. How can we, the common people, make wild guesses about you?" The ordinary-looking Taoist took out a yellowed book from his sleeve and tossed it to Yuan Tingshan from a distance. His voice was light, unlike Yuan Tingshan's, which was full of vigor, but his voice could be heard clearly in the roar of the waterfall. Xinyuan Jingqing sought his own heaven's retribution, but in fact after the last heaven's thunder, which was as thick as a peak, he still had one spiritual soul and one physical soul left. That's why this humble Taoist said to send him off just now. "It was fate that I met you at Yunjin Mountain and your murderous aura scared away the dragon salamander that was about to turn into a dragon. We met so many people, but you were the only one who was willing to eat the wild fruit in the bamboo basket. It's also fate. The Tao that I cultivate is the most boring word, seclusion. It's almost the same as the wild fox Zen of Buddhism. If there's fate, there's a need to resolve it. Today I'll get a book from Xinyuan Jingqing for you. It's Xinyuan Jingqing's martial arts experience that he had honed for 100 years. It's not limited to knife skills and you can progress step by step." Yuan Tingshan took the secret book that had yellowed pages and became more and more brand new as it went on. He could even smell the scent of ink on the last dozen pages. His body couldn't help but tremble. Yuan Tingshan was not an inexperienced wanderer who only knew how to accumulate fame. He had been influenced by Mount Hui, which was full of people, and knew the ways of the world by heart. Moreover, Mount Hui was a place where good and bad people mixed together. The things that they lacked the least were Jianghu secrets and gossip. The martial artists of Jianghu, except for the land immortals who had profound means in the past dynasties, had always been fiercer and more powerful with each generation. No one said that those who had lived longer were necessarily more powerful. Wudong Mountain, which competed with Dragon and Tiger for the leadership of Taoism, had their young chief entered celestial phenomenon. Then did Song Jiming, who had lived for 150 years, enter Vajra realm? Therefore, whether a martial arts secret book was good or not was the same as a chess record. The older the antique was, the less valuable it was. Xinyuan Jingqing was a genuine celestial phenomenon master. How could his life's work be measured by mountains of gold and silver? Not to mention one Xinyuan Qingfeng, even if 10 Xinyuan Qingfeng were to be exchanged, Yuan Tingshan wouldn't even look at them. However, Yuan Tingshan, who was cold by nature, was frightened. His expression became serious and he carefully put the book into his bosom. He stood up and bowed to show his seriousness. He raised his head and asked, "What does Senior Immortal want Yuan Tingshan to do?" "I'll go through a mountain of swords and a sea of flames." Although Yuan Tingshan is a penniless pauper, this promise made under the premise of mutual consent is indeed worth some money. The middle-aged Taoist went straight to the point. "Only when a tiger has grown wings will there be chaos. You've already seen the crown prince of Bailiang. I don't need you to kill him. I only need you to remove his wings. After you've read Xianyuan Jingqing's cultivation experience, you can use it to hone your martial arts." Yuan Tingshan laughed. Senior Immortal has suffered a great loss in this deal. With Yuan Tingshan's bad temper, even if he's His Royal Highness, the King of Bailiang or the Emperor, as long as he annoys me, I'll chop him off his horse. The middle-aged Taoist appeared to be in a rare trance. He turned his head to look at the big snow plateau that was full of potholes after the heavenly tribulation. He muttered, "There are 80,000 words in the world, but only one word can kill. The word, love, can mislead people. The word love, can kill." Therefore, Ancestor Lu once left a sword hanging on the eaves of Beijing, passing on the Tao of the Sword of Wisdom to his descendants. Even though this seemingly middle-aged Taoist had already transcended, he still sighed at this moment. "Xianyuan Jingqing, since you know that you can't force it, then why bother to pay the price? I've never seen such talent in my life. If you used it outside of Mount Hui, who in the world would be able to bind your hands and feet? Why would you gamble everything for a woman, just to look at her from afar? It's better not to fight. Also, you're a woman who is infatuated but doesn't understand love. You don't care about ethics, morality and shame, but why do you even care who's good to you? You keep saying that you don't care about Xianyuan Jingqing, but if you really don't care, why do you do things that make Xianyuan Jingqing unhappy? When people meet, there are only two kinds of fate, good and evil. Evil fate isn't fate?" Yuan Tingshan, who couldn't hear clearly, asked tentatively, "Senior Immortal, may I ask if that Xianyuan Jingqing really entered the realm of Earth Immortal?" The Taoist nodded and said, "It's the great Immortal without a doubt." Yuan Tingshan looked fascinated and muttered to himself, "A real man should be like this." The young man then spat a mouthful of saliva into the pond and said angrily, "It's fine if you don't want to be an Earth Immortal, but your wife has been used as a cauldron for dual cultivation. You've been a coward for 20 years. There's nothing more stifling in the world than this." The middle-aged Taoist said calmly, "Put yourself in Xianyuan Jingqing's shoes, what would you do if you were him?" Yuan Tingshan had a look of disdain and said without hesitation, "If I were Xianyuan Jingqing, I wouldn't care if I could kill ancestor Xianyuan Pan. I would first kill that loose woman, chop her up and feed her to the dogs. Xianyuan Jingqing really isn't a man. He even King raised that loose woman like a female bodhisattva. Just thinking about it makes me angry." The Taoist shook his head with a smile, "You'll understand in the future. Some women know it's bad but they just can't let it go." I don't want to meet this kind of loose woman." Yuan Tingshan was stunned for a moment and asked nervously, "Senior Immortal, have you met her before?" The middle-aged Taoist didn't answer directly but smiled and said, "In our generation of cultivation, our predecessors have written countless books. They're all illusions. They say 1,000 words, but they're actually just seeking the word, truth. And truth is often connected with love. True feelings, you need to know the Tao of heaven. Forgetting love doesn't mean you're heartless." Yuan Tingshan, who had always had a strong killing intent and evil aura, faced this mysterious Taoist. He imperceptibly weakened his aura and asked, "Senior Immortal, are you teaching me a lesson?" The Taoist made a mystery and said with a smile, "This Taoist can't be tied to you anymore. Fate is a mess, so don't give this Taoist any more difficult problems." Chapter 323. Yuan Tingshan asked curiously, "I can still feel qi. I know that the Taoist sect you're from has a few sayings about listening to qi, looking inside and guarding the orifices. However, I really don't believe in fate." The middle-aged Taoist smiled, "Do you only believe in the blade in your hand?" Yuan Tingshan did not feel ashamed at all. He nodded heavily, "Of course. I didn't believe in my parents in the past and I won't believe in my wife in the future, let alone other people. I only believe in the blade in my hand." A withered yellow autumn leaf drifted in the air. The middle-aged Taoist flicked his finger, and the yellow leaf drifted over. The withered leaf was like a blade, cutting a gray butterfly beside Yuan Tingshan in half. The gray butterfly scattered on the surface of the water and was swallowed by a fish. The middle-aged Taoist said softly, Do you believe that this is fate? Do you believe that this action of mine will cause me to lose a few days of cultivation? The evolution of heaven and earth will form a world of its own. Life has its own rules and regulations. This is the Taoist sect's excuse for being difficult to understand. It's not as vivid as the secular world saying. There's a scale in the human heart, and it's difficult for every family to recite scriptures. In a person's life, whether they do good or evil, it's like doing business with the heavens. It's always between positive and negative. Those who take advantage of the situation can be seen as accumulating merit money. They are all relatively shrewd merchants. This is the real foundation of the three sections. This is also the reason why only the three sects are still standing in the 100 schools of thought, such as the school of Mo. To me, Zhongyi's idea is very good, but it's a pity that he can't escape the fate of losing money. You might not like to hear this, so I'll tell you more details. There's a dragon pond in the Celestial Master's residence. It raises over 10 kinds of spiritual creatures that were found from all over the world. It uses spiritual energy to cultivate the lotus in the pond. This lotus is also known as the longevity fate lotus. The bottom lotus has already bloomed for 1,600 years. Currently, Mount Longhu's fate is flourishing, and there are as many as 18 lotus flowers. 500 years ago, Mount Wudong was powerful, and there were only 6 lotus flowers in the dragon pond. In the recent 100 years, Qi Xuanzhen ascended, and a celestial master changed the emperor's fate. Later on, Mount Longhu became the sect leader, and new lotus flowers bloomed in all Taoist sections. Do you really think that Zhao Danping went down the mountain to the capital because of a dispute with Zhao Danxia's brother? That year, 3 lotuses of the Lotus of Providence withered for no reason. This was a situation that had never happened even when Su Xiao attacked Mount Longhu. As the new leader of Mount Wudong connected the providence of heaven and earth, another 3 lotuses withered in the dragon pool. Yuan Tingshan, do you know how much effort those nobles of the Celestial Master Mansion have put in? As for Xianyuan Jingqing, whom you look down upon, this person is not inferior to me in terms of the theory of providence patterns. In fact, he is even better than me. As for why I admire Xianyuan Jingqing so much, I won't tell you. Not reaching celestial phenomenon and not touching the mysteries of the heavens were not deliberately exaggerated by the ancestors. Yuan Tingshan was dumbfounded. The middle-aged Taoist laughed self-deprecatingly and sat down cross-legged. Life and death are 2 different things. I have cultivated for 300 years. Back then, I went astray and cultivated to be a hermit. Now that I've talked about it, I can't stop talking. Fine, I'll talk to my heart's content today. Let's talk about the Lotus of Providence at the Dragon Pool and the Wu family sword tomb. There are hundreds of thousands of ancient swords, famous swords, and broken swords. The children of ordinary people are caught when they are 1 year old. After the children of the Wu family are born, they will be led by their elders to the Sword Mountain. They can only go down the mountain after they find a life sword. Do you believe that there are people who go up the mountain when they are just a few years old and can't go down the mountain until they die of old age? Yuan Tingshan sat closer to the middle-aged Taoist and asked in confusion, "Won't they starve to death?" The Taoist said indifferently, "Before the age of 10, the guards of the sword tomb will send some food. After 10, it's up to the heavens." Yuan Tingshan was not blindly cautious and did not know what was good for him. When he got closer, he let go of the hilt and put it aside. Hearing this secret that he had never heard of, Yuan Tingshan curled his lips and showed disdain for the Wu family sword tomb. He said sarcastically, "The Wu family sword tomb's glory is only when the 9 swords came out of Beimang. The 100 years old and new sword gods have nothing to do with them." The middle-aged Taoist said indifferently, "You know about Dong Tai?" Yuan Tingshan laughed heroically and said, "Of course. Among the sword experts today, this guy has the most celestial aura. Sooner or later, I will use this guy as a whetstone." The Taoist looked at the rising mist in the pond and said, "The world only knows that Dong Tai came out of nowhere and fought with Wang Xinji of the martial emperor city to a draw. Later on, he went to the Wu family sword tomb to seek revenge. However, they did not know that Dong Tai practiced the sword in the sword tomb Sword Mountain. This person was originally an illegitimate son of the Wu family. After he was discovered by the sword tomb, he was brought back to the family when he was 6 years old. According to the sect's rules, he was thrown to the Sword Immortal realm. Who would have thought that this throw would throw a great talent who could enter the Sword Immortal realm at any time? Wang Xinji is not willing to be number 1 in the world, but Dong Tai is not much inferior." Yuan Tingshan hesitated for a moment and swallowed his words back into his stomach. This was very rare. The middle-aged Taoist was able to see through people's thoughts and said with a smile, "You want to ask if my cultivation is compared to Dong Tai Wang Xinji?" After his thoughts were seen through, Yuan Tingshan did not pretend to be polite and said with a grin, Yuan Tingshan is bold enough to ask. The Taoist seemed to be modest and said, if it's a competition of strength, of course I can't beat Wang Xianxia. This young man with the surname Wang was said by a stubborn old man of the Dragon Tiger Mountain to be a martial artist who could compete with ancestor Lu. Since ancient times, proving one's Tao with strength has been a wrong path. Only that young man managed to hit the right path. Yuan Tingshan knew that this Taoist tone was so big that it could accommodate the whole world when he was at the edge of the deep pond in Yunjin Mountain. He did not make a fuss when he heard the middle-aged Taoist call the city lord of the martial emperor city a young man. Yuan Tingshan did not believe in anything but believed that whoever had the hardest fist was the boss. Since it was obvious that this immortal was an expert whose cultivation was unfathomable, even if he said that he was the Tao ancestor or the founder of the three pure ones, Yuan Tingshan would still hold his nose and cheer loudly. Moreover, Yuan Tingshan was more shocked by the terror of the old monster Wang's supernatural power. He clicked his tongue and said, this old man is invincible. The middle-aged Taoist chuckled softly and said, a single word from a monarch can decide a person's life and death. You must know that the most holy of the three sects can borrow the power of heaven, earth, ghosts and gods to turn their words into prophecies. In the past 100 years, the number of land immortals who stood out among the three sects and 9 schools can be counted with one's fingers. However, in your generation the number of land immortals can be counted with 2 hands. It's because that person who killed millions of people was bored and shifted the remaining fate of the 8 fallen countries to another chessboard. Yuan Tingshan, I don't know if I can see you occupy a place in my lifetime. Yuan Tingshan was surprised and said, me? The Taoist said calmly, Yuan Tingshan, I don't mind telling you the truth. Killing the crown prince of Bailiang has cost you a lot of your fate. Yuan Tingshan was about to draw his sword out of anger, but he managed to hold back his impulse. The middle-aged Taoist continued, but with you and I sitting here, I've finally returned some fate to you. The middle-aged Yuan Tingshan's gaze was like a knife as he asked, Immortal Elder, who are you? Why are you so fond of me? I've never believed that a pie would fall from the sky. Even if it did, it wouldn't fall on Yuan Tingshan's head. The Taoist looked at the rainbow and muttered to himself, back then, I let down the country and the beauty and insisted on entering the mountain to cultivate. What? I've thought about it for many years but I still couldn't figure it out. Therefore there are many things that don't make sense in the end. Why did Xianyuan Jingqing like that woman? Why did she choose to jump off the cliff even after seeing Xianyuan Jingqing's remnant soul? Also, why did that Fengdu green robe fall in love with Li Chungang at first sight and never forget him? In the creation of heaven and earth, there's no greater spiritual energy than humans. What is heaven's secret? It's probably the human heart. I remember back then when I watched Qi Xuanzhen and Li Chungang fight, Li Chungang went down the mountain quietly. Later on, I talked to Qi Xuanzhen about this matter and finally asked him why he never left Mount Longhu in his life. Yuan Tingshan couldn't wait to ask, why? The middle-aged Taoist exhaled a long breath and said slowly, Qi Xuanzhen said he was enlightened at the age of 12. He knew he was Lu Dongxian, so he waited for a red robe. However, he knew he couldn't wait for that life, so he reincarnated. He was just waiting. Yuan Tingshan was shocked to the extreme. He said with his eyes wide open, Immortal Qi didn't ascend, but ancestor Lu reincarnated. There's really reincarnation. How can he know his past life? The middle-aged Taoist sighed, I don't know who Qi Xuanzhen reincarnated as, and I waited for this life. Roughly speaking, since the time of ancestor Lu more than 500 years ago, based on the 60 years of life, there should be 10 lifetimes, right? Yuan Tingshan was absent-minded as if he had fallen into a demon's trap. He suddenly became ferocious. Hey, what ancestor Lu reincarnated? What immortal Qi reincarnated? I ran into that red robe so I'll kill him first. If I can make this immortal wait for another life after 500 years, I won't waste my time in this world. The Taoist narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything. Heaven's secret was heavy. Unfortunately, Yuan Tingshan didn't notice it at all. Chapter 324. A yellow horse that was as thin as a match was tied to a tree, snorting weakly. A few black crows perched on the branches were making annoying noises. An inconspicuous old man slowly turned around from behind the tree. He tightened his belt and had a helpless look on his face. He couldn't even defecate in peace. He raised his head and shushed the crows a few times. However, the crows were indeed birds that lived near the city. They were more experienced than the old sparrows on the Spring God Lake. They were not afraid of the bluffing old man under the tree at all. The old man was not angry at this. He picked up the reins with one hand and led the horse forward slowly. He weighed the ragged money pouch in his hand. There were not many copper coins left. He glanced at his beloved horse that accompanied him along the way. The yellow horse was nicknamed Little Yellow. It was like the old man's own son, never being ridden. If there were only reeds that could be used as a mattress, Little Yellow would have slept on it first. Alas, a poor man's ambition was short, and a thin horse's hair was long. In fact, the silver that he carried with him was enough for food and clothing. From the north to the east, the old man ate and slept in the open. He did not have any expenses. It was only when his stomach was full of wine worms that he went to the downtown market or a roadside wine stall to buy a bottle of wine to satisfy his cravings. However, along the way he met a few pitiful people and spent the silver like splashing water. In the past, the young master said that people in troubled times were not as good as dogs in peaceful times. However, now that the world was peaceful and prosperous, not everyone could be lucky enough to raise a dog in peaceful times. The old man who could not even defecate was from Western Shu. In this life he had traveled to many places. He did not consider himself a Jianghu hero who helped people in distress. Indeed, when he traveled outside he was more generous than the rich. Even if he was the richest in the world, how could he compare to the emperor and his young master? If he compared his life experience he was not sure. There was no worst, only worse. On this trip he spent a large sum of money to cross the river, not to pay the cheap ferry fare of a few dozen copper coins. The two boat women on the boat were a pair of mother and daughter. The boatman was the head of the family. He had a sharp mouth and monkey cheeks. After rowing for a while, he said that he was tired and asked his wife to take over. He squatted at the bow and played dice. He was addicted to gambling. Before they reached the shore, the man's eyes were sharp. He saw the old man's money pouch and asked him if he wanted to eat some meat. At first, the old man thought it was some carp that could be fished up from the river. Since there was still half a pot of wine in the wine pot, he agreed. But when he saw the mother and daughter expressionlessly took off their thin and mended clothes, the old man was scared. Only then did he realize that they were prostitutes on the ship. He hurriedly stopped them, and when they reached the shore, they threw away the majority of the money and ran away as fast as they could. When the old man traveled with the young master in the past, when he came across bold village women who exposed their breasts to feed their babies, he would stare until the young master pulled him away. If he really wanted to do something serious, the old man really couldn't do it. Moreover, the mother and daughter were so young that they could be his daughter and granddaughter. Especially the little girl's real age was only 13 or 14 years old. On top of that, because her family was poor and couldn't afford to eat, she looked like an 11 or 12-year-old girl from a rich family. If he did this kind of thing, wouldn't he be punished by the heavens? Taking 10,000 steps back, the Prime Minister's gatekeeper was a third-rank official. Even Grand Secretary Zhang's gatekeeper couldn't compare to the Bailiang Palace where Old Huang lived, right? Although Old Huang was only a horse feeder in the prince's mansion, according to this saying, not to mention third rank, I should be a seventh-rank official. If I really wanted a woman and went crazy, would it be difficult? Old Huang had woven more than 10 pairs of straw sandals for the young master, so I wouldn't be lacking in any way. When we were traveling, the young master unintentionally brought up this matter, saying that when we returned to Bailiang, he would help me find a wife to warm my bed. When Old Huang thought of this, he laughed foolishly, subconsciously swallowing his saliva. Of course, he didn't dare to defile a beautiful maiden. A middle-aged woman still had her charm and whatnot. He also admitted that he wasn't worthy. However, at that time Old Huang still hoped that there would be a fair and tender maiden rolling in the sheets. Why, I was just being polite with the young master. Why did the young master take it seriously? Old Huang slapped his face and muttered to himself, Old Huang, who asked you to pretend to be a master? Back then you didn't become a blacksmith but practiced swordsmanship. Wasn't it so that you could get close to those heroines? Why did you become stupid after practicing so much? Why did you ruin such an ambitious and beautiful original intention? The young master was indeed knowledgeable, but he wasn't sour. His words were especially comfortable. Every time he stole a chicken or duck or nibbled on cucumbers or roasted sweet potatoes, when he was in a good mood, his words were beautiful. Old Huang clearly remembered a saying that in the world, there was a kind of person whose heart was higher than the sky and whose life was thinner than paper. He thought about achieving great things all day long, but unfortunately he didn't have the ability to do so. Old Huang felt that this was a great truth. Even a boor like him who didn't know how to read understood it. Hey, was he praising him, Old Huang, for having the strength to do the things he wanted to do? Old Huang was secretly happy when he thought about it. When he grinned, people would notice that he was missing 2 front teeth and was very leaky. The old man and the skinny horse walked slowly, but in this world as long as one walked, no matter how long the journey was, there would always be an end. Wouldn't they be able to see the majestic city as soon as they looked up? Martial Emperor City wasn't originally called Martial Emperor City, but Overlook City. It was a vassal city of a royal family in Dongyue during the spring and autumn period. It was named after a line in a poem written by sage Zhang when he traveled to the eastern sea thousands of years ago. Donglin's stone platform to see the vast sea. Later on, Wang Xinji, who was a nobody, fought again and again in the Jianghu. He was highly regarded by the royal family of Dongyue and was taken in as their son-in-law. They wanted to use Wang Xinji's invincible strength to rebel and usurp the country. After they failed, they hoped that one person would die to atone for the crime of the whole city. After the city was besieged, as a member of the royal family, he committed suicide in front of 60,000 armored soldiers. The emperor of Dongyue was still unwilling to let him go. Of course, he didn't say that he wanted to exterminate his entire family. After all, if he did so, wouldn't the emperor's own family be killed? However, the massacre of the entire city was unavoidable. Coincidentally, Wang Xinji had just returned from a battle with the contemporary sword god, Li Chungang. He didn't waste any words with the emperor and directly killed his way from the outside of the city to the outside. He carried the city lord's corpse back into the city and then killed his way back to the outside of the city. He killed his way back to the outside of the city 3 times. On the last time, he killed his way to just 30 steps away from the East Yu Emperor's tent. He killed all the elites of the Eastern Yu sword pool who had been the imperial guards of Dongyue for generations. Wang Xinji forced the emperor to make a vow to the city by himself. That was how the martial emperor city became independent during the spring and autumn period. The older Wang Xinji got, the more profound he became, occupied the eastern sea and looked down on the Jianghu. He was truly invincible. In the end, when the Liang dynasty unified the country, the old emperor, who had established an unprecedented great cause, personally rushed to the martial emperor city to have a private talk with Wang Xinji. One was the emperor who ruled the world, the other was an ordinary man who claimed to be able to kill the immortals of the earth. The world only knew that the two of them had a pleasant conversation. Neither the emperor nor the ordinary man was angered. After that, even when the martial emperor city secretly killed the Jianghu people, the imperial court only turned a blind eye to it. Nowadays, Wang Xinji rarely fought with others. The world no longer expected anyone to be able to defeat this martial artist who was so conceited that he could fight with ancestor Lu 500 years ago. The new sword god, Dong Tai and Xing Yi Chao Changqing were all legendary figures. However, in the martial emperor city, they only fought until they were undefeated. Everyone had already regarded them as deities. Ordinary experts weren't worthy to meet Wang Xinji, let alone Wang Xinji. As for Wang Xinji, who used human strength to prove the heavenly Tao, if he really wanted to kill someone, even the immortals of the earth, as long as they hadn't ascended, would be unable to defeat Wang Xinji. The old man walked to the towering city gate. The people of the Jianghu who entered the city together with him were all experts with boundless elegance. If they weren't those who had red hair and iron arms, it felt like they could blow people away with just a sneeze, then they were those who stood out from the crowd. If they were to fart, the entire Jianghu would say that it was fragrant. The old man was like an inferior horse. Both of them were starving. It was really unsightly. Most importantly, before this old man entered the city, he purposely slowed down his pace, allowing a young heroine in luxurious clothes to walk in front of him. While he was staring at her charming swaying buttocks, he took out an ivory comb and combed his messy gray hair. Since this beautiful heroine in exquisite clothes dared to come to the martial emperor city alone, she definitely wasn't an ordinary young lady who only knew how to play zither, go, calligraphy, and painting. Sensing the gaze behind her, she turned around and glared. However, when she saw that it was an old man who was leading an inferior horse that was even worse than a mule, she didn't bother about it anymore. She snorted coldly and went straight into the city. The old man said to himself, "If my young master and that brat Wenhua saw this young lady, my young master would probably cheat Wenhua of his money again, right?" After entering the city, the old man walked along the central city's main road until he could see the top of the city wall. Then he sat down at a roadside wine stall and poured out all the copper coins in his money pouch onto the table. He grinned and said, "Waiter, bring me a pot of good yellow wine and boil it for me." The waiter was a local of the martial emperor city and had never looked down on foreign martial artists, let alone an old man like this. He rolled his eyes and said, "This amount of copper coins is barely enough to exchange for a mouthful of yellow wine." Old Huang smiled foolishly and said, "It doesn't matter. I'll just take a mouthful. Give me a small bowl and I'll treat it as a bowl of wine." After he finished speaking, he ignored the waiter's look and raised his head to look at the top of the city wall. He said softly, "Young master, the situation is tense. But this time, old Huang won't talk nonsense." Chapter 325. Xinyuan Qingfeng. It really wasn't a festive name. Su Fengnian and the new head of the Xinyuan family left the Dragon King River on the same boat. From the looks of it, this woman wouldn't stop until they reached the Great River. On the surface, she had at least done her part as a host. She hadn't even warmed up the position of head of the Great Bull Gang yet, and she had already gotten into character so early? Su Fengnian didn't dislike her sending him off. After all, he had left in a hurry and didn't have time to talk about many things. Or perhaps the things he talked about were too vague. He immediately sat at the bow of the boat and ate hawthorn as he talked to Xinyuan Qingfeng in detail. Xinyuan Qingfeng basically agreed to all of his requests and was very aware of being a puppet. Su Fengnian wasn't used to seeing her meek and obedient demeanor. Perhaps it was because he and Wenhua had been taught a lesson by this shrewish woman back in the Lantern Festival. Although Wenhua had a nondescript wooden sword in the past, he practiced the vile sword art. Especially after he colluded with His Royal Highness, his swordsmanship was still muddled, but his vile sword art was already perfected. After being chased around by Xinyuan Qingfeng's evil slave for half a day, he was still stubborn even after being stepped on by her. No matter what, he was a good man who didn't fight with women. Otherwise, with his size, he could cut 10 of you with one hand. At that time, Xinyuan Qingfeng, who was still living a happy life, sneered and ordered the people to let go of Wenhua. Then she used a horsewhip to cut the wooden sword ranger 7 or 8 times from head to toe. After the two were dragged away by old Huang, Su Fengnian almost recognized Wenhua, which was enough to show how ruthless Xinyuan Qingfeng was. Since then, Wenhua had been thinking every day about the day when he had perfected his swordsmanship and could hold his head high. He would definitely go to Mount Hui and beat her to death with his wooden sword. Every time he talked about this, Wenhua would lovingly gaze at beggar Su, who was as soft and tender as a woman. His Royal Highness would feel goosebumps all over. That one guy. Xinyuan Qingfeng obviously paused for a moment, probably intending to add a comment like a libertine. However, life was full of ups and downs. The lecherous beggar he met by chance years ago had suddenly become the legitimate eldest son of the most powerful king in the world. According to common sense, birds of a feather flock together. A young man who could do such despicable things with the crown prince of Bailiang must be either rich or noble. Most likely, he was loitering outside of Bailiang under the guise of studying abroad. Therefore, Xinyuan Qingfeng asked a reasonable question. Is it a son of an aristocratic family who has been traveling around the various provinces? Su Fengnian just held his belly and laughed without any explanation. After he was done laughing, he leisurely ate the hawthorn and spat out a few seeds. He asked in a seemingly casual manner, "There's a machete man in Mount Hui called Yuan Tingshan. I heard that you're very familiar with him?" Xinyuan Qingfeng, who had been standing and looking down, said calmly, "When I left the mountain, I had already sent my guest, Hong Yuan, to lead more than 20 men of sacrifice to the Sisters' Waterfall to encircle and annihilate Yuan Tingshan." Su Fengnian suppressed the shock in his heart and said with a smile, "Is this a sign of allegiance to express goodwill to me?" Xinyuan Qingfeng said coldly, "As long as your highness does not betray Mount Hui, Xinyuan Qingfeng will not betray your highness." As expected of father and daughter. You speak in the same tone. Su Fengnian sighed from the bottom of his heart. He grabbed a handful of hawthorns and raised his hands slightly, wanting to give it to the woman who was temporarily sitting on the same boat as him. Seeing her wooden and indifferent expression, Su Fengnian did not feel embarrassed. He threw a hawthorn into his mouth and stood up to look at the river. His field of vision was wide and he saw a flight of gray geese in the sky. Second sister Su Weisheng had once said that the geese in front of him would definitely be an experienced old geese who had traveled south and returned north. Su Fengnian was lost in thought when Xu Xiu came from the back of the boat, reporting that there was a raft of people chasing after them from Mount Hui's ferry. Su Fengnian walked to the side of the boat and saw a familiar-looking man on the raft. It was the flower thief who had been surrounded by danger by Bluebird's Xana spear. He waved the fan of beauty and thought that he could bring about a cool autumn. Su Fengnian absolutely did not like this self-proclaimed romantic Jianghu man. Later, more than 30 people rushed to the snowy plains, putting on a grand display of changing their allegiance. Unfortunately, these heroes' flattery was all for naught. More than 10 fence-sitters with uncertain positions were hung up by His Royal Highness on the spot. Su Fengnian saw that this fellow was pestering him endlessly, but he did not intend to make a fuss about it. However, what was strange was that other than this low-ranking guest from Mount Hui, there was also a young child on the raft who was not familiar with the ways of the world. He looked like he was carved from jade with rosy lips and white teeth. He was very likable and adorable. Su Fengyin was immediately shocked. Could it be that nowadays, it had become popular to bring along family members to seek refuge? The man who had made a name for himself in Jianghu by picking flowers, rode his bamboo pole with all his might, trying his best to catch up with the large boat. With great difficulty he finally caught up with the large boat. In a loud voice he said, "His Royal Highness Long Yushuan of Jian Province's Langyi County, requests an audience." Su Fengyin unhappily said, "Didn't you see him? Did you take your son fishing on the Shi River?" Long Yushuan seemed to have been hit in his weak spot. He was slightly flustered and exasperated. He hurriedly explained, "Your Highness, this humble one left in a hurry. I don't know how this strange child got on the bamboo raft. This humble one doesn't even know this child." Unexpectedly, the delicate child called out, "Dad," crisply, which immediately made Long Yushuan lose his composure. The pitiful guest, who was somewhat famous in Jianghu, was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He turned his head to look at the innocent child at his feet and glared at him. "Dad, you're my dad. Can't you be my dad?" The child suddenly burst into tears. His two small hands did not forget to grab Long Yushuan's robe. He sobbed miserably and said, "Dad, Mom died early. You can't abandon me." Chapter 326. Long Yushuan almost went mad with anger. But he didn't move. Otherwise, with his strength he could easily kick this child into the river and feed him to the turtles. Long Yushuan boasted that he had never been touched by a single flower. He had only had brief relationships with the beauties painted on the peach blossom fan. How could he have a son? Did he really think that it was easy to be a virtuous flower thief in this day and age? Not to mention that he needed to be handsome and talented, other than those pretty girls from humble families who had been enchanted by the book, The First Snow, and wanted to elope with a poor scholar. Long Yushuan was quite relaxed. All he had to do was wave his fan and recite poems. But for those girls from respectable families, just by looking at their belts, jade pendants, fragrant sachets and other trivial things, Long Yushuan could tell how much weight they had. Want to ride a horse? Oh my, do you know how much money a good horse costs? It was a bottomless pit. The women of noble families had their eyes on the top of their heads. Each and every one of them had a vicious and crafty gaze. If they wanted to show off their wealth, they had to spend a lot of money. Long Yushuan had spent money like water these years, but he hadn't been able to save a single copper coin. Last time, he had swindled the county governor's daughter with a fine purple colt. It was said that one tail of purple colt's meat was one tail of gold. How heavy was this horse? How much money did it cost? Of course, the cash-strapped Long Yushuan couldn't afford it. He had borrowed it with great difficulty from a disreputable noble family disciple from another province. Thus, every time Long Yushuan caressed the peach blossom fan, he couldn't help but shed bitter tears for himself. He had been a low-level guest at Mount Hui and didn't have enough money. Back then he had only borrowed this large umbrella to shelter himself from the rain. Now the few who had held the umbrella were all dead. The snowfield was truly deserving of its name. It was said that even the insufferably arrogant ancestor Shenyuan Pan had died just like that. If that little girl, Shenyuan Qingfeng, were to hold the umbrella, how big could she hold it with her small hands? Long Yushuan saw that His Royal Highness's methods were truly impressive, so he was determined to follow him to Beiliang. It was rumored that Beiliang had a Yinji county, and that the women there were so fair and tender that water could be squeezed out of them. How could Long Yushuan not be infuriated when a bastard suddenly appeared out of nowhere and called him father? Su Fengyin and Shenyuan Qingfeng exchanged glances. She shook her head and said softly, "Every guest has a secret file in Mount Huishan. Shenyuan Qingfeng memorized every single one of them. There's no record of them having children." Su Fengyin said to Long Yushuan on the bamboo raft, "If you want to prove that he's not your son, it's simple. Kick him into the river and you can get on the boat." Long Yushuan was stunned. Su Fengyin quietly waited for the rest of the story. If this person really did such a ruthless thing, not only would the old god of swords Li Chungang be able to save the drowning child, even he and Bluebird would be able to do it. As for the rapist, there was no point in him getting on the boat. Even if they boarded the ship, they would still die. Beiliang had used a lot of money, fame and fortune to raise dozens of capable people. A bull's mound was unreachable in the Jianghu, but to a colossus like Beiliang, it wasn't even worth mentioning. A guest of Mount Huishan? If he was thrown into Beiliang Palace, how many splashes could he make on Tidehark Lake? There weren't many interesting people in the world like Chu Lushan, who was as cruel and unscrupulous as a wolf for 10 years. But apart from being ruthless, how could a rapist compare to Fatty Chu's methods? There was news from Xiangfan City that a man with polychoria surnamed Lu had become so engrossed in killing that he had turned Jing and palace upside down. But Long Yuxuan only smiled and said, "Let's say goodbye to His Royal Highness." Su Fengyin slowed down the raft and put some distance between it and the ship. Her eyes suddenly widened as she saw the man give her the middle finger, then turn the raft around and flee toward Mount Huishan. Xianyuan Qingfeng turned her head slightly, the corners of her mouth quirking up. She originally didn't like Long Yuxuan, but his actions today were true to his nature and made her see him in a new light. Originally, the rapist Long Yuxuan's reputation was terrible and his martial arts weren't outstanding, so she had her own thoughts. This person couldn't even be considered a chicken rib for Mount Huishan. She was also a woman and innately detested Long Yuxuan's actions. After taking over the bull's mound, she originally planned to give him a few lesser-known secret manuals and some gold and silver as a reward to get him out of Mount Huishan. But now she changed her mind. Although she was forced by the situation to help the crown prince do evil, she was very happy that someone could cause trouble for His Royal Highness. Su Fengyin smiled and said, "You have guts. You should be rewarded." Shenyuan Qingfeng seemed to be afraid that this scheming His Royal Highness would have the intention to kill. She said softly, "It's not easy for the ship to turn around. With the speed of the raft, it'll reach the shore soon. This person has fled into the dense forest of Mount Longhu, the ancestral court of Taoism. It'll be difficult to find him again." Su Fengyin didn't say anything but thought of another Jianghu. This Jianghu was probably something even Shenyuan Qingfeng couldn't imagine. There was no sword god with 2 sleeves and a green snake sword that opened the gate of heaven, no Chao Qingyi and Wang Mingyin, no celestial ancestor of Mount Huishan, and no Confucian sage, a land immortal. Even Long Yuxuan, a lowly guest elder who looked like an ant at the moment. There were old servants and crippled horses, bandits and thieves, wanderers with wooden swords and a straw bag beggar. Every day they could ask for food and clothing, and if they didn't mistreat their stomachs, everything would be fine. If their farts could have the smell of meat and not just the smell of sweet potatoes and garlic, then it would be even more fortunate. He clearly remembered that wanderer with a wooden sword at his side to put on a shabby front. His specialty was to use yams, glutinous noodles and sesame oil to make a meal. The yams were mashed and stewed until they were soft. The glutinous noodles were kneaded repeatedly, filtered through a straw sieve, and then found a bamboo cage to steam them. He then stir-fried them with sesame oil, added onions and garlic and stir-fried them. He had never eaten such delicious food in his life. Every time he had to fight with the one surnamed one until his face was covered in dirt. The strength that he had accumulated with great difficulty after wolfing down the food was all used up in the fight. After they were done, the two of them would lie on the ground with their arms and legs spread out, happily bragging and farting. They would bitterly say that the wanderer they saw in the downtown area yesterday was just a man with a pretty face. They would drool when they saw the bosom of the pretty girl from a humble family on the 2nd floor of the restaurant the day before yesterday, and talk about how aggressive they were. The one surnamed one couldn't even afford a metal sword or a bronze sword. After meeting him and old Huang, they wouldn't have known each other without a fight. He liked to run into the crowd even when he was leading his horse and drinking water. He couldn't wait for everyone in the world to know that he was a young master who could both afford to buy and raise horses. This guy really wanted to save face. This was also Jianghu. There were 2 places in Jianghu. Su Fengyin preferred the one where there was a lively Wenhua. Therefore, Su Fengyin turned to Xianyuan Qingfeng and said with a smile, "I'll have to trouble you to find this person and tell him that I've accepted him as a guest official of Beiliang Palace." Xianyuan Qingfeng frowned and said, "Really?" Su Fengyin nodded and said, "When I speak under the bed, my saliva is a pit." Chapter 327. After Xianyuan Qingfeng changed boats, he didn't return to the Bull Mound. Instead, he followed the Dragon King River and entered the Azure Dragon Stream, heading towards Mount Longhu to look for that guest elder. The flower thief didn't mind being a stray dog. Without a residence to guard, he could live without any restraints. Thus, when Xianyuan Qingfeng found him, this guy actually managed to catch a pheasant and roast it over a bonfire with the child. Long Yuxuan saw with his own eyes that the Prince of Beiliang's ship didn't turn around, so he relaxed a little. Furthermore, he didn't expect Xianyuan Qingfeng to mobilize so many people to enter the mountain to hunt him down. When he was surrounded, he didn't have any heroic spirit, nor did he wag his tail to beg for mercy. He only asked Mount Hui to let off the child who seemed to have jumped out of a rock. Xianyuan Qingfeng didn't beat around the bush and roughly explain the meaning of the Su Fengnian. Long Yuxuan was filled with vigilance, afraid that he would walk right into the trap. Seeing that this person was so displeased, Xianyuan Qingfeng was slightly displeased and left without saying anything. Long Yuxuan actually believed most of Xianyuan Qingfeng's words when he saw the formation he had set up. However, what really made him decide to chase after the big ship was the child beside him saying, "Father, let's capture all the big sisters on the ship and make them our mothers." Even if Long Xuanyu had 10 times the guts of a bear and a leopard, he wouldn't dare to snatch the women from his royal highness. He wouldn't even dare to take a few more glances to feast his eyes. However, since he had a way out, his face was still acceptable. If he didn't go with the flow, when would he? After catching up to Xianyuan Qingfeng, she magnanimously got off the boat at the Dragon King River and lent it to him. When Long Yuxuan bid farewell to her, he was sincerely convinced for the first time and promised that if he could achieve meteoric success in Bailiang in the future, he wouldn't forget Miss Xuanyuan's kindness in recommending him. After catching up to that air in the Shi River, Long Yuxuan still felt as if he was walking on thin ice after changing boats. However, His Royal Highness didn't exchange pleasantries and asked the retainer to arrange accommodations for the father and son pair. This actually made Long Yuxuan feel extremely reassured. After that, he didn't take half a step out of the cabin and behaved himself. He was afraid that His Royal Highness would mistakenly think that he had the idea of picking flowers again. If that happened, he would die unjustly. It wasn't easy for him to jump from an unranked guest of Mount Hui to a guest of honor in Bailiang Palace. It could be considered as a carp jumping over the dragon gate. If he were to be slaughtered right after becoming a sky dragon, it wouldn't be so miserable. On the other hand, that little brat was like a newborn calf that wasn't afraid of tigers. He acted like an old man and was in a complete mess. Whenever he felt bored, he would walk out of the cabin with his hands behind his back. If he wasn't leaning on the railing to look at the river, he would stand at the bow of the ship and assume all kinds of postures that showed that he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. That wasn't all. When he saw the beauties of several His Highness, he approached the androgynous brother and sister. He raised his little head and sighed softly with a look of disappointment. Then he walked to the front of the most beautiful young woman. He raised his head and stared at the same spot, nodding slightly. Finally, he came to the side of the older sister who was holding the white cat. When he saw the rise and fall of her breasts, his eyes lit up and he said in a deep voice, "Good. Good. Very good." The women didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even the cold-tempered Princess Jing, En Pei Nanwei, was amused. Murong Wuzhu covered her mouth and laughed. She didn't mind this little brat mocking her breasts. Yu Wei stared blankly for a moment. The little guy said, "I'll help you hold the white cat, you can hold me." After saying that, he jumped up and wanted to take Wu Meinyang. However, His Royal Highness, who was watching coldly from the side, took a big step forward and lifted the little bastard up by the back of his collar. He hung him in the air and scolded jokingly, "You dare to take advantage of this heir apparent's woman. If you're not Long Yuxuan's son, who would believe you?" The child couldn't reach the sky and couldn't fall to the ground. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws in the air. Yu Wei glared at His Royal Highness. She was naturally charming. For the next 2 days on the surface of the river, Su Fengnian, who was originally the core of the strict hierarchical circle, was somewhat harmonious due to this child's disturbance. It was like a paper hanger mending a leaky window. Finally, there was some warmth. The child did not have a name or surname. Even if he was beaten to death, he would not admit that this child was his child. Yu Wei was rarely childish. She saw that he had raised 2 crickets at some point in time and would often lie on the deck with his buttocks sticking out to watch the 2 insects fight fiercely. Therefore, she gave him the nickname of Little Bug. On the ship, other than the old man who was in closed-door training and had never shown his face, and His Royal Highness did not have a good impression of this little pervert, there was almost no one who did not like him. Even the 2 pet beasts, the charmingly naive white cat Wu Meinyang and the lively and active tiger Kue Bodhisattva, did not treat this child as a stranger. Especially Wu Meinyang, who would often sneak out of the cabin and find the child. When she found him, she would leap on top of him and throw herself on his little face. A strange scene that was often seen was the child fighting the crickets. A white cat and a tiger Kue Bodhisattva would quietly squat on the side and watch the fight. Every time Su Fengnian bumped into this child, he would gently kick the child's buttocks, making him fall flat on his face. Only then would he vent his anger. Who told this little pervert, who was better than his master, to knock on every woman's door every night with all kinds of strange excuses? "Sister Murong, it's getting cold. Do you need Little Bug to warm your bed?" Father said that young men can make pancakes on their buttocks. When little bug is warm, I'll lie in it, okay? Epee, the night is long. Little bug is not in the mood to sleep. The Mid-Autumn Festival is coming. Why don't we admire the moon together? Sister Yu, that part of yours is heavy. Are you tired? Little bug is good at kneading and massaging. I'll help you relieve your tiredness, okay? Sister Bluebird, I know you like to wear green clothes. Today, little bug specially changed into green clothes. Don't we look like cousins who have been betrothed since childhood? Acting like a hooligan did not seem to work. The little bastard was very clever. He immediately changed his approach and knocked on the door. Sister Morong, you and I are both destitute people who have left our homes. Shouldn't we comfort each other? Auntie Pei, I heard that you're good at hand-to-hand games. Little Worm stole the chess set and learned the 2 moves Big Avalanche from Dad during the day, so he secretly created his own inner twist move. Why don't we fight until dawn? Sister Yu, little bug helped you find your lazy cat, Wu Mainyang. Open the door. Sister Bluebird, little bug wants to learn the spear art from you. For the past few days, Long Yuxuan had been living in fear and trepidation. Facing this little guy who had just taken off his pants, he certainly could not beat him up. However, no matter if he pretended to scold him or patiently persuaded him, this cheap son of his would just roll his eyes. Even more so, he could not beat him up. Although Long Yuxuan was a flower thief, he was not an extremely vicious person. Otherwise, on the bamboo raft, he would not have chosen not to bite the bait that was laced with poison and instead turned back. In general, they were father and son in name, but this little guy was already acting like a father. Later, Long Yuxuan saw that the atmosphere on the boat was not serious. Although the little guy was messing around, he heard that he was quite popular among beauties. Therefore, he decided to just ignore him and do whatever he wanted. The boat was at the Shi River, but they could already see a small riverside city. This was the border of the Jian province. If they continued north, they would reach the Eastern Sea Martial Emperor city in 10 days. The old god of swords, Li Chungang, finally walked out of the cabin and came to the bow. Su Fengyin was too far away from the old man, so he could not see any clues. Long Yuxuan was finally summoned by His Royal Highness and was officially recognized as having a place on the boat. After chatting for a while, Su Fengyin found out that this former flower thief was actually from the school of Moism. Although the school of Moism had declined along with the other schools of thought, before the spring and autumn period, only Confucianism was respected. At that time, Buddhism had not spread from the west to the east. The school of Moism, which worshipped gods and ghosts, could compete with Taoism. Unfortunately, they were not as tactful as Buddhism and Taoism. They directly clashed with the rising and unstoppable Confucianism. Several schools of thought could not fit in and finally lost. However, the leader of the school of Moism, Jizi, had always been known as the ghost god in the human world and was still a high and mysterious figure. Long Yuxuan was the disciple of the previous Jizi and was one of the 36 pro-disciples. As for why he was expelled from the sect, Long Yuxuan did not explain in detail. Su Fengyin was also too lazy to get to the bottom of it. Who didn't have a book or a loincloth? The people of Jianghu were no different from the scholars. Most of them were stubborn. Hitting someone was a matter of gratitude and grudges, but hitting someone's face was a matter of life and death. On the shore, the fearless Su Fengyin saw a woman with a sword and subconsciously shrunk his neck. With a whoosh, he hid in the cabin and did not dare to disembark. The people on the boat who had met His Royal Highness other than Bailiang all thought that they had met with a disaster. Otherwise, with the domineering Bailiang heir and his family background, how could he be so timid? Long Yuxuan carefully looked at the woman who had boarded the boat. Although he was shocked, he was also curious. This young woman's appearance was average and did not look fierce. Was there a heroine in the world who could make his new master fear? Out of his professional instincts, Long Yuxuan wondered if His Highness the Crown Prince had done some shady business and had his lover come knocking on his door. However, the beauties around His Royal Highness were all peerlessly beautiful. No matter how bad his taste was, he would not go so far as to steal this woman in front of him, right? Just as Long Yuxuan was puzzled, the heroine sneered after boarding the boat. Su Fengyin. What? You dare to go to Wu Wu City but don't dare to see me? Chapter 328. What was Jianghu? It was a curtain of pearls. Women were those pearls strung together to form Jianghu. The woman who had boarded the ship, whom Long Yuxuan had mistaken as a heroine, was undoubtedly the brightest pearl in Jianghu. There was almost no need for the suffix, one of. Although her appearance was only average, she was delicate and aloof. When she was young, she had traveled all over Bailiang with her family, drawing geographical maps. Later on, she entered Xianxia Academy and studied under Chancellor Dao Lin and the great master of the School of Military Strategy. She was famous for her poetry and literature, especially for the creation of 19 chessboards. She was the world's hegemon. Her chess style was calm and she could see strategies. Strangely enough, when she played chess, she rarely made a move that would make the spectators feel as if they had been struck by lightning. She was neither treacherous nor evil. Her moves were firm and steady. It seemed that she did not seek to make any achievements, but only sought to make no mistakes. Often, when she entered the middle chessboard, she would have a perfect winning spirit without any flaws. Judging a person based on calligraphy, she naturally could not be called a beauty. However, if one were to judge a person based on chess, she was undoubtedly an unparalleled existence in the world. On the chessboard, she convinced people with her reasoning. Outside of the chessboard, she had also made many moves to convince people with her strength. Her sword was not a gaudy ornament. She had cut off a head in Xianxia Academy. This was a feat that the previous Wuxia scholar of Xie Lake, the spring and autumn demon Huang Longshi had never done. Today's literary circle had mixed praise for this young woman, but no one said that she was mediocre. But all of this was nothing. To the idiotic crown prince, he even dared to chase after Su Xiao with a broom. The reason why he was afraid of her on this trip was because he had a guilty conscience. If it was in the past, he would not be able to reason with his second sister, Su Weisheng. He would make a scene and annoy her. Most of the time he would be able to muddle through. However, this time he would most likely lose a layer of skin. Su Weisheng had treated him well and did not touch the art of war that could defeat 10,000 enemies. Instead, he did not learn how to maneuver in the imperial court. That boorish man was already very disgusted with him. In addition, when Su Fengyin took the risk of going to Martial Emperor City, he was even angrier. A gentleman would not stand against a collapsing wall. If he was not a gentleman, he should be even more so. Originally, he should go to Gangnam-do first to visit his eldest sister, Su Jihu, or go to Xianxia Academy to find his second sister. According to the itinerary, if he wanted to save time, he should go to Xianxia Academy, Mount Longhu and Martial Emperor City, and then pass by Hutting County on the way back. However, it was because he was worried about his second sister's feelings that he took so many detours. As Su Jihu had said, he still had to consider whether his second sister would be petty about going to Gangnam-do first before going to the academy. The ship was only so big. How long would it take for His Royal Highness, who was like a fish waiting to be slaughtered on the chopping board, to hide? Su Fengyin didn't wait for Su Weisheng to enter the cabin to search. He squeezed out a smile and trotted out. Without saying anything, he hugged his second sister and didn't give her a chance to hit him with the scabbard. He called her sister in a flattering manner. However, he kept in mind that he should call her sister and not second sister. He said with a mischievous smile, "Why are you in the Jianghu? This place is a little far from the lifeless Xianxia Academy." Murong Xiong and Murong Xiong looked at each other. Even Murong Tonghuang, who was always shrewd and scheming, was dumbfounded by this scene. Su Weisheng, who was being hugged, didn't struggle. He said calmly, "I'm afraid that after you enter the Martial Emperor City, you will be cooked in a pot, including your skin and bones. Therefore I have no choice but to wait here. This is a private matter. As for the public matter, it is a triennial examination of knowledge held by the Academy. The Geomancy examination is set at the Earth Lung Mountain in the north of the Jianghu. It tests one's ability to look at the aura, locate the cave and search for the dragon. Chancellor Wang has been drinking too much. Therefore, I will be acting as the examiner." Su Fengyin turned his head to look at the riverbank. Only then did he see a large group of scholars dressed like scholars standing there. The young ones had not yet reached the age of 20, while the old ones were already in their 60s. Most of them were carrying a heavy and bulky bookcase on their backs. Very few of them were wearing embroidered and magnificent clothes. However, it was exactly as the old saying goes, those who have a scholarly aura will naturally have a scholarly aura. Even Su Fengyin, an unscrupulous idiot who hated scholars the most, couldn't bring himself to dislike them. He wasn't the least bit surprised that his second sister was taking on the role of Mr. Ji Shang as a scholar. His second sister's knowledge was profound and varied. She had mastered the subject through a comprehensive study, and her words were brilliant. No matter if it was the orthodox classics, moral essays, or those misunderstood heterodox doctrines, or strange and ingenious obscenities, she was deeply involved in all of them. This was especially true for geomancy. She had once written, annotated and corrected dragon scripture, and carved jade axe Luan Tu Song collection, which were exquisite to the smallest detail. Throughout the entire book, not a single word was deliberately obscure and difficult to understand. Because she liked to carry an ancient sword and travel the mountains and rivers, she was wholeheartedly convinced by the geomancy masters and was known as Su Qingshui or Mr. Qinggu. Su Fengnian released his hand and took a step back. He stared blankly at his travel-worn second sister. For a long time he didn't say anything. He just helped her to tuck a strand of black hair behind her ear. Chapter 329. In the Su family she was the most elegant general among all the children of the Su family. However, Su Weisheng was even more famous for his stubbornness. There was once a famous literary scholar who wrote a famous poem that was handed down from generation to generation. In the poem there was a famous line, regardless of the details, regardless of the propriety, 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 the propriety, regardless of 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 the propriety. Su Weisheng was kind and didn't exaggerate. He only wrote 3 sentences in his reply. If a man doesn't keep his word, why not die? His words and actions contradicted each other. What an old thief. Teaching books to mislead the students. The old man was so angry that he vomited blood and fell seriously ill. Only then did the truth of the chess gambling incident at the academy come to light. The literary community naturally criticized this woman for being unreasonable. As for the chess players of the world, they suddenly realized that Su Weisheng would never lose if he played black. Although the position system limited the advantage of playing white first, it was simply a miracle that Su Weisheng, who had played more than 100 games and competed with the great chess players of that time, could still play black and not lose. These were important matters, and Su Fengnian also knew some trivial matters. Second sister was obsessed with cleanliness, and everything in the boudoir was meticulously arranged, almost to the point of being rigid. The vase, the brush, the inkstone, the chair, the couch, the stove, the book and so on, had not changed in the slightest for more than 10 years. When he was young, the naughty Su Fengnian's favorite thing to do was to sneak into second sister's room and quietly move some small things that couldn't be seen. Without exception, Su Weisheng would always find some clues, and then find Su Fengnian and pinch his ears to death. Relying on his coarse skin and thick flesh, Su Fengnian never got tired of playing for many years. In his impression, Su Weisheng's clothes were simple and plain, but they were very clean. It was never as eye-catching as it was today, and it could be seen that she had left in a hurry. In the end, this warm and tender scene of a sister and brother meeting was ruined by a lustful little wimpy kid. Miss Hogg. Su Weisheng lowered her head to look. It was a child with lively eyebrows. She only glanced at it, and before she even opened her mouth to speak, the little bug shrunk its neck. Perhaps it was this child's ability to observe people's expressions since it was in its mother's womb. It immediately ran away, hiding behind Sister Yu, who was holding the white cat, and poking its little head out to peep. Wu Meinyang was intimate with him, jumping out of the gentle tomb of the world's heroes between Yu Yu's twin peaks. In the end, she was slapped to the ground by the child, who was in a bad mood. Wu Meinyang didn't get angry. She used her head to rub the child's trousers, making His Royal Highness, who had raised it until it was white and fat but refused to even hug it, furious. This was the first time Su Weisheng had seen the old god of swords, Li Chungang. The old man in the sheepskin coat was yawning, his spirit dispirited and listless. He didn't have the slightest respect for her because she was the princess of Bailiang or Su Qingchong. Su Weisheng, however, bowed respectfully and said, Su Weisheng greets Sir Li. Sir, the words sword from the great snow plains are so loud that even the deaf can hear. Sir, everyone and heir apparent. These 3 words had become a disaster after the spring and autumn period was settled. They were like a flood that couldn't be stopped. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry on the roadside could put a big hat on his head while flattering each other. However, when it came from Su Weisheng's mouth, the weight couldn't be more solid. In the Xianxia Academy, which was regarded as a holy land by scholars all over the world, even the 2 teachers and the Grand Chancellor didn't have the fortune to be called Sir by her. Only a nameless and blind zither player could be called Sir by her. Obviously, Su Weisheng was so serious about this matter because he admired the old god of swords from the bottom of his heart. It wasn't because of Li Chuangang's achievement as a sword immortal, but because of his great perseverance after falling out of the earth immortal realm to enter this realm. If he was only a sword immortal, compared to Su Weisheng, he was just a boorish swordsman with sharper sword in his hand and more capable of killing people. What benefit did he have to the world? The old man sized up Su Weisheng and shook his head. Your aptitude is not as good as little Zhang's. Su Weisheng said calmly, I practice the sword only to strengthen my body. Li Chungang lectured him without holding back. What a pity for such a good sword. In your hands, it won't be able to sing to its heart's content. Su Weisheng smiled and said, I only know some swordsmanship which can't be compared to Mr. Li's swordsmanship. If Mr. Li lacks a suitable weapon during your trip to Martial Emperor City, Su Weisheng can give this sword to Mr. Li. Su Fengyin said angrily, No way. Su Weisheng frowned. Su Fengyin immediately smiled and said, I don't lack swords here. Li Chungang didn't even want to bother with His Royal Highness. He said to the decisive Su Weisheng, The sword is a good one, but I know that you have a deep understanding of swordsmanship. Saying that you only know swordsmanship is too modest. A gentleman fulfills another's wish, while a villain snatches another's. This old man is neither a virtuous gentleman nor a vile person who can't bear to see others doing well. I won't give them away or rob them. Moreover, whether there is a sword or not, it doesn't matter to this old man anymore. Su Weisheng, you don't have to test this old man. Since this old man has promised Su Xiao that this kid can return to Bailiang without missing an arm or a leg, whether it's the Eastern Sea or the capital city, as long as this kid dares to go, this old man can guarantee that he can leave alive. Su Weisheng never bowed like a woman. Instead, he bowed like a man and said softly, Thank you, Mr. Li, for your promise. Li Chungang had a helpless expression. He clicked his tongue and said, I heard that the Jiang girl was bullied by you and wanted to get back some face for her after meeting you. Now that you've bowed twice, this old man really doesn't have the face to make a move. Su Weisheng smiled calmly. His words were truly shocking. He said slowly, To tell you the truth, since ancient times, mother-in-law and sister-in-law have been at odds with each other. It doesn't mean that those mother-in-law and sister-in-law are all bad people. They just want to make the women who marry into the family think more about their husbands. Su Weisheng has always treated Jiang and I as his younger sister-in-law. It's just that she has a lively personality and our mother passed away early, so I have to be the bad guy. However, Su Weisheng knew that Chao Changqing took Jiang and I away. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have been the bad guy all those years. The tranquility was like a sudden clap of thunder. Li Chungang was stunned. He gave a thumbs up and praised, Su Xiao is more fortunate to have you than to have this rascal. This chapter was updated on the 22nd. Chapter 330. Su Weisheng was not surprised by Li Chuangang's praise. He looked at Su Fengyin and asked, Is there food on the ship? In order to stop you on the way, I was in a bit of a hurry and missed lunch. You owe those people a meal. Su Fengyin nodded and said, That's not a problem. There are many freshly caught freshwater fish stored on the ship. As soon as he finished speaking, Blue Bird went to instruct the cooks to get to work. Su Weisheng turned to disembark the ship and brought the 20 or so scholars of Jixia onto the deck. These scholars of different ages seemed to be somewhat reserved. Only a few military students took the initiative to come forward and greet His Royal Highness. Only Xianxia Academy was bitterly holding on, sheltering the poor scholars of the world and preserving the seeds of education for the future generations. Unfortunately, the academy was a private school. In terms of financial resources, it was far from being as extravagant as the Imperial College, which was endowed with gifts from the emperor and ministers. During the spring and autumn period, the academy was funded by the rich and powerful families. Now all of the vermilion gates and high walls had become broken walls and dilapidated walls. It was increasingly poor and in dire straits. As a result, other than the military students who studied the wars of the past dynasties, most of the scholars of Jishang and Jixia had a natural dislike for the Su family of Bailiang. During lunch, Su Fengyin and his second sister, Su Weisheng, purposely avoided the crowd and opened a small meal. Su Fengyin wolfed down his food while Su Weisheng chewed slowly. The two personalities were completely different. Su Fengyin knew that she did not like to talk while eating, so he minded his own business and opened the bookcase. He saw a few bags of soil and reached out to pinch them. He sniffed them and frowned. He carefully put them into his mouth and tasted them. He asked in shock, "This dragon sand was dug out from that Taoist paradise, Earth Lung Mountain? It's true that it's dragon sand, but the taste is not quite the same as what Brother Yao Jian said. Why do I feel like there's something wrong with it?" His Royal Highness often went to the Bailiang Mountains with his second sister and dragon scholar Yao Jian to search for dragon acupoints during his youth, so he knew a little about feng shui. Even though Su Fengyin did not have the ability to search for dragon acupoints in 3 years, he was still able to recognize the basic pattern of dragon veins. Digging dragon sand was actually the same as digging winter bamboo shoots. It was a test of experience and knack. Su Weisheng was a master in this field, so Su Fengyin could only stumble upon it by accident. However, he still had a good eye for the quality of the dragon sand he obtained. There were 6 or 7 bags of dragon sand in the box, most of which had already been burned. Su Fengyin picked up the bag that he tasted and sealed it with 3 yellow talisman characters. 3 pure ones rule, 8 ice plum blossom, and Chuyun saddle horse. There was no doubt that it came from his second sister, Su Weisheng. This was because the seal books were very particular. The rules of the talisman had to match the birth date of the unearthed dragon sand. Furthermore, the unearthed dragon sand was not a small matter. Regardless of whether it was a Taoist dragon scholar or a greenbag master, none of them were allowed to take dragon sand. This was especially so after the unification of the country. The imperial court had ordered that any dragon sand unearthed must be approved by the Chongshen Bureau and the imperial astronomer. However, in the past 20 years, there had not been a single case of approval. Su Weisheng's actions were undoubtedly against the imperial court's laws. However, Su Fengyin was too lazy to pay attention to such details. He was just curious about how the Earth Lung Mountain had been the top of the heavenly abode since ancient times, so how could an evil dragon appear? One had to know that in the ranking of the Grotto Heavens and Blessed Lands, even the Tao Court's Mount Longhu was several ranks lower than the Earth Lung Mountain. However, for hundreds of years, the Earth Lung Mountain had always been an ungoverned land where no great Taoist master cultivated. Counting with one's fingers, it had already been 500 years since the previous dynasty sealed off the mountain. Su Weisheng put down his chopsticks and sighed softly. The examination of Jixia scholars' qi-gazing technique this time was just a cover. The evil dragon has recently appeared in the Earth Lung Mountain, and Chancellor Wang deduced that it has something to do with Mount Longhu, which is of the same lineage as the Earth Lung Mountain. It was only suppressed by Heavenly Master Zhao Danping that the imperial astronomer didn't make things difficult for the imperial court. Su Fengyin's expression changed when he heard that. He gritted his teeth and said, "It must be that Zhao Huangchao's evil method of stealing the sky and swapping the sun. Sister, if it's really as I guessed, the imperial astronomer wouldn't dare to interfere at all." Su Weisheng had a face of doubt. Su Fengyin smiled and stood up. Come. Sister, let me help you wash your hair. We'll talk while we wash." Su Weisheng did not refuse. Su Fengyin had the green bird outside the door bring in a basin of hot water and a piece of jade pancreas. Poor families used to wash their hair with cheap and coarse honey locust, but rich families were much more particular. Inside the pancreas was ground pearl powder, so it was called jade pancreas. Su Fengyin held his second sister's soft black hair. His eyes were warm, and with a soft voice he said, "One night on Mount Quanglu I felt like I was dreaming, but not dreaming. I saw Nyangqin. Nyangqin came with a white python to protect me, this disappointing son." Zhao Huangchao, who looked like a middle-aged Taoist, said that he was cultivating at Mount Longhu, but he was most likely the old ancestor in the capital. He rode on a black dragon and went on a spiritual journey. His ostentation was lawless, and he said that he was going to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. Coincidentally, a scholar named Xianyuan Jingqing entered the realm of Confucian Saint a few days ago. I asked the old god of swords about the rules of celestial beings in a roundabout way. I knew that the immortal Taoist Jinren of Taoism condensed their own fate and couldn't easily interfere with the operation of the mortal world. Zhao Huangchao's move more or less didn't conform to the principles of Taoism. This Taoist must have transferred the aftereffects of celestial beings' out-of-body state to the ownerless Earth Lung Mountain. Otherwise, it would be tantamount to forming a grudge with the Taoist mansion of Mount Longhu. I don't understand. Our Bailiang obviously won't be so free to rebel. What's this Zhao Huangchao worried about? Su Weisheng said calmly. Of course he's worried that the Zhao family won't be able to stabilize their country forever. Su Fengnian sneered and said, which dynasty can be passed down for thousands of generations? They keep saying, long live the emperor and long live the empress, but who can really live for thousands of years? Eating carrots and worrying about salty things? Su Fengnian said gloomily, with this Taoist Jinren's realm, if he doesn't ascend, wouldn't he be standing in a latrine pit and not taking a shit? It's only on Mount Longhu. If we were in Bailiang, we'd have to mobilize 10,000 cavalrymen to crush this old bastard into powder. Su Weisheng tilted his head and the corner of his mouth curled up. He turned a blind eye and laughed, yawning. Toad, you sure talk big. Let's not talk about whether a celestial being Taoist can be killed. Let's talk about whether you can command 10,000 cavalrymen now. Let's not talk about 10,000, even 1,000, can you do it? Chapter 331. After washing her hair, Su Fengnian wiped Su Weisheng's hair with a towel. They sat down. His Royal Highness helped Su Weisheng comb her hair. He was proud of his second sister's sarcasm. He laughed. Borrowing troops from heroes like Chen Zhibao and Yan Xiong is asking for trouble. But there's still Fatty Chu. If there's no other way, we can borrow from Yuan Zuozong and Brother Yao. Su Weisheng asked with a faint smile. Are you sure that Yuan Zuozong and Yao Jian will lend you? Aren't you afraid of Su Zhao's military punishment? You have to know that in northern Liang, regardless of whether you are close or distant, as long as you violate the military rules, you have to act according to the law. Su Fengnian was still not serious. Brother Yao is stubborn, so it's hard to say. But if it's Yuan Zuozong, if there's an emergency, I may be able to borrow 1,000 or 2,000 troops. Su Weisheng asked, Are you sure? Su Fengnian nodded, I'm sure. Su Weisheng took the red sandalwood comb and chuckled. You just drank with Yuan Zuozong a few times. Do you think your friendship is so good? You should know that Yuan Zuozong can't tolerate sand in his eyes the most. He and Chu Lushan are both Su Zhao's adopted sons, but they are like fire and water. It can be seen that you, a foppish son, are confident you can enter Yuan Baixiong's eyes? Su Fengnian curled his lips. It's up to you to believe it or not. Su Weisheng said sarcastically, It's disappointing that you didn't fight in Dragon Tiger Mountain. Su Fengnian shook his head and said, The commotion is not small. Oh right, that Xianyuan Jingqing, who relied on reading books to become a land immortal, has some cultivation experience. It's not very useful to me at the moment. It's the same as not reading it. Xianyuan Jingqing attracted countless heavenly thunders on the Great Snow Plateau. That scene was not inferior to that of a general leading thousands of cavalry. Along the way, I've checked many Taoist Qi refinement scriptures, but I feel that none of them are as down-to-earth as this moral forbidding thunder incantation. The Fengdu Ghost Punishing Incantation, and the Abyss Divine Incantation Scripture, of the Dragon Tiger Mountain's 24-level incantation scriptures seem to be more mystical and not very practical. I've studied it for half a month, but I still can't figure out how to cast the landslide spell and the water boil spell. This forbidding thunder incantation, however, seems to be according to the book's records. If you cultivate it to the extreme, you can borrow the power of the heavens just like Xianyuan Jingqing. It's a pity that I'm practicing the saber, so I'm not on this path. By the way, when I was studying the red armor talisman with the old celestial master Zhao Shituan at Dragon Tiger Mountain, I checked it out. The Qi cultivation incantation seems to have originated from the ancient barbarian land where Shangyin Academy is located. Maybe there's a unique ancient book in the academy that you need. Also, according to the Forbidden Thunder spell, I helped you steal a few Thunder Sect secret scrolls from Dragon Tiger Mountain. There are probably some incantations to guide the Thunder Sect's divine warriors. According to the old Celestial Master, the ascended Celestial Masters of Dragon Tiger Mountain would leave their essence incantations in the Dragon Lake. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to steal these treasures for you. Also, that female tiger Kuei nicknamed Bodhisattva, the one called King Kong, I've already given it to Huang Manor. Bodhisattva will give it to you. His Royal Highness rambled on endlessly. Su Weisheng interrupted Su Fengnian's rambling and said with a smile, You've given me all the good stuff. What about yourself? Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment. He smiled and pointed at the two sabers at his waist. he said matter-of-factly, what use do I have for those worldly possessions? The spring thunder embroidered winter is enough. Su Fengyin saw that his second sister was silent. He knew that she didn't like him practicing the saber and being a brute warrior. He changed the topic and asked, "Today I saw the famous Wuxia scholar of Xianxia Academy with my own eyes. Only then did I know that there are a lot of poor people?" Su Weisheng smiled and said, "Scholars carry books and travel to study, and wanderers carry their swords and travel. These are the two main trends nowadays. The former started when this old man Jianghu traveled to various countries. It's just that it's hard for those poor landowning households that have already declined. For the sake of face, they still pay attention to carrying books and traveling after their heirs reach the age of 20. For this reason they don't hesitate to scrape together money. Think about it, when a weak scholar travels, it's at least a few hundred li away. They have to have a page to take care of their basic necessities, as well as an old servant who's familiar with the ways of the world. Won't the small families rack their brains over the expenses of these three people? Therefore, some landowning households that have long been no different from the poor families don't dare to dream of traveling thousands of li when they carry books and travel to study. At most, they just visit a few counties in a state and try their best to visit a few famous scholars and experts. They drink tea and discuss Taoism with them. That's all. The families of many scholars don't hesitate to squander their family fortune in order to enter Xianxia Academy. On this trip to Earthlung Mountain, there was a Jixia scholar in the group who stayed outside the academy for 18 years before passing the examination. He's already over 50 years old. Most of the Jixia scholars who teach him are younger than him. In order to save money to buy more books, he only eats steamed buns and salted vegetables all year round. Therefore, Xianxia Academy isn't as useless as you originally thought. Those who can enter Xianxia Academy regardless of morality are not bad. Su Weisheng stretched out his hands and pinched Su Fengyin's cheeks. He smiled and said, "It seems that you've benefited a lot from these 2 trips. I'm wondering if I should persuade you to go to Beimang again." Su Fengyin said sluggishly, "Sister, do you really think so?" Su Weisheng increased his strength and said, "Since I can't stop you from practicing the knife, and it seems that your knife practice is not just about developing your limbs, it's not right for me to stop you. But let me say this first. Since you want to practice the knife, you should at least practice until you become a land immortal, right? It's been hundreds of years since anyone has done this." Su Fengyin's face was bitter. He said vaguely, "Sister, why don't you practice the sword until you become a sword immortal?" Su Weisheng let go of his hand and smiled with squinted eyes. "Sister, you're a woman. Fighting and killing is not ladylike." Su Fengyin said helplessly, "Sister, you're so reasonable." Su Weisheng stood up and said, "Let's go. Since I've decided not to stop you from practicing the knife, I won't stop you from going to Martial Emperor City. You just have to be careful." Su Fengyin and his second sister walked out of the cabin together. Coincidentally, there was a poor old scholar leaning against the railing and looking at the river nearby. He muttered to himself, "Even a homeless dog like me has homesickness."